magically hamming the stage. Prince Barbaro. The golden light finally died down to reveal a woman in similar white attire to the priestess peasant. Though, unlike her, there were quite a few extreme differences that I noticed almost instantly. There were the pair of golden furred ears that stuck out through her strange hat, the 10 matching golden tails that swayed behind her, and her extremely voluptuous form. Of what little I could see of her face, the rumors of her beauty had not been untruthful. A smirk grew on my face as I looked upon the fox princess standing before me. Obviously, I called this bluff of hers and scared her into finally coming out of hiding. Like any cowardly mage, when she was put against the might of the Re-Estais kingdom, she finally conceded. "No longer hiding, are you, witch?" I commented with amusement. "I was never hiding, Prince Barbaro. I was actually in the middle of other important matters before I was informed that my followers were in danger," she replied while motioning to the 2 other peasants to leave. I made no motion to stop them as they were insignificant next to the real prize of the one organizing all of this chaos. "Now, why is it that you are threatening my people?" What a jest for this woman to not know. She still tries to pretend like I haven't already deduced her true purpose here. Do you think me daft, woman? Why wouldn't I threaten those working with the Baharuth to destabilize my kingdom? Because neither I, nor any of the people behind me, are working with the Baharuth Empire or attempting to harm the Re-Estais. In fact, my people worked with the E-Rantal branch of the Re-Estais military to try and repel 2 different undead armies just about a week ago. The Fox Princess replied. This earned a chuckle from me as the idea of 2 undead armies somehow appearing deeply within the borders of the kingdom without being noticed was absolute absurdity. I admire your commitment to the lie, but it is growing tiring and testing my patience. You will tell me everything about this plan that the Baharuth has set up. Then, you will tell me everything else that you know. Depending upon how satisfactory your answer is, I'm certain that we can come to an arrangement to lessen your punishment. After all, I could always use a mage in my court whose skills I would be able to take great pleasurable use of. But this deal will only apply to you, as the rest need to be dealt with to act as a message. What I didn't add is that with her under my thumb, I could make claim to be in control of a goddess. That would probably silence any other talk among the common rabble who actually believed her to be divine. In fact, they'd probably worship me as the future king who tamed a goddess. Before the witch said anything, it felt like the air had turned hot, like the midst of a warm day of the summer. "Barbaro, I'm trying to be diplomatic to prevent any type of political incident from happening, but you're managing to wear out my patience for your arrogant and narcissistic bullshit. Since arriving here, you've insulted me in numerous ways, said in veiled terms that you'll make me sleep with you to save my life, and followed that by openly stating how intend to kill a great many innocent people for no real reason, besides a badly cobbled together theory on my allegiances." My eyes narrowed at the impudent witch's words. "Daft wench, you would dare to give such insult as to spur the extremely generous offer given to you by the future king?" As I said this, the noise of blades being drawn by my men filled my ears as they anticipated my impending command. I couldn't resist the malicious smirk that grew on my face at the punishment this peasant and her people would receive for this insolence. While I'd much prefer to have been able to use her while presenting to the court in Re-Estais that the goddess was under my command, I'd have to settle with bringing her head back instead. What is a would-be king to a goddess, Barbaro? You've no doubt already seen what I did to your cousin who ran 8 fingers, alongside heard what I've been doing to the rest of their members. Really, threats to my life? I was about to speak when what she said next made a chill run down my spine. What do you think I'm going to do to the lackey of Hilma's who has been working with her for years, fingling Barbaro? She knew too much. Just the mere utterance of my hidden ties to one of the leaders of 8 fingers made this witch too dangerous to let live. I have to execute her now. Kill her, I commanded while giving the signal to the rest of my cavalry units to charge the settlement. That was until golden ethereal chains burst from the ground and wrapped around my horse, my body, and that of my 10 men and their mounts before all of us were dragged off our horses and onto the ground. The harsh screams of fright of the horses filled my ears as the chains held all of the horses in place. Mixed in with this were the shouts of struggle from my soldiers. "What have you done, you vile witch?" I demanded while attempting to struggle against these chains. At the same time, I looked around at my cavalry who were waiting for my signal to see that none of them had budged an inch. "What are you doing? Save your prince," I shouted to them, yet I received no movement. "Sorry to tell you, Barbaro, but none of your soldiers are going to move an inch, since none of them actually know that you are in danger. The moment that I sent Paimu and Evelyn away, I threw up an illusion to cover us. From their perspective, you and the riders accompanying you are still on top of your horses talking down to me." Hearing the witch say this made me pause in horror. None of my men could see me because of this magical trickery, and that meant that my army couldn't even attempt to save me. Ominously, looking up to the woman, I saw a pair of glowing golden eyes looking at me with something akin to boredom. Chilling, isn't it? To know that you have no power here, nothing to protect you from your own terrible choices. For the first time in your life, your name and title mean absolutely nothing. I furiously renewed my struggles to escape this witch, but I couldn't break free. None of my men could either. "You can't do this. I'm the future king of this country." A chilling laugh came from the woman, and I found the words drying up in my throat. "No, that's exceedingly unlikely to happen. Especially," the witch leaned close to me and said silently to me, "because I'm helping Rena to take the throne as queen. After all, unlike you, she's competent." I found myself silenced from sheer disbelief at what she said. "Rena? Queen? With you and your soldiers like this, I think that it's time for me to talk to the rest of your people since you are unreasonable and I have no more wish to talk with you." I don't exactly know when she did it, but the way that my cavalry reacted informed me that the witch had dropped whatever illusion she was using to cover us. Then, before my soldiers had time to react, her voice seemed to echo all over the area, amplified by more of her vile magics. "Soldiers of the Re-Esti's kingdom that came here today, I have captured Prince Barbaro after he tried to attack me and have multiple innocent people killed. I give you all the chance to stay here in peace, without conflict or bloodshed, and rest after many long days of travel. Or you may return back to your homes, be with your families and loved ones. Don't take this only offer of kindness I give you as weakness, for I will annihilate any that try to attack those under my protection." In demonstration of this threat, I watched as a massive meteor grew into existence over a good portion of my cavalry and just hovered there, like an executioner's blade ready to fall. It seemed like this which only did so over the main gathering of my forces, as the rest of my cavalry was too spread for whatever magic she used to summon a meteor. Still, it seemed like enough of a scare tactic to be effective. Already, I could see many of the newer members of the cavalry break away in retreat, like the cowardly peasants and low-born nobles that they were, against any orders their commanders gave to stay put. This was absurd. This had to be an illusionary trick that this woman had conjured. Even were it not, my men had been trained to fight the filthy Baharuth battle mages. This was just one witch. "What are you doing? Begin the charge and kill this witch. Your prince demands it," I roared out to my soldiers in hearing distance of me. Yet, they remained hesitant and skittish at obeying such a simple command. Again, the witch's voice boomed around the area. "Let me inform those of you thinking of loyally following Prince Barbaro to your dooms, your prince shares no such loyalty for any of you. Barbaro cares for none but himself, and he will let all of you die to save his own hide. So little does he care about any of you, that he's willing to make your lives worse if it enriches his." The conjured chains then lifted me from the ground and raised me aloft into the air in an undignified manner that I futilely struggled against. For many years, he has worked closely with one of the leaders of Eight Fingers, Hilmus Ignaeus, to help both the drug and slave trade. Ask yourselves, how many of you know of someone, be it family, friend, or neighbor, that has been hurt or impacted by Eight Fingers, and then realize that Barbaro is one of the people intentionally helping it happen? Do you really want to die for him? I found my eyes worriedly looking at my soldiers as this pretentious peasant was somehow convincing a good number of the simple-minded peasants, as a number of them either sheathed their blades or raised their spears back into resting position. Some even had the audacity to openly glare at me. I found a growl growing in my throat at how this bitch was ruining what should have been a moment of triumph for me. Are you halfwits actually planning to believe whatever lies this witch spews compared to your prince? I screamed out to all of them that could hear me. All of those who showed such traitorous actions would be whipped and executed once this witch was dealt with. Barbro, the bitch said, her voice only audible to me, realize that most of your soldiers have no wish of needlessly dying against such an overwhelming threat when given the option to live at the cost of absolutely nothing. Most of them only care about earning their pay and returning home at the end of the day. Holding a meteor over their heads scared some away. Telling them your illicit history dissuaded a few more from bothering to help or listen to you. Now, the only ones left. Much to my glee, a few hundred soldiers remained loyal and did their duty to obey my command by charging towards the bitch or, looking over my shoulder, I saw more of my cavalry charge at the settlement. You should have taken my generous offer when you had the chance, witch. Your head is going to decorate a pike now, I said with a large measure of satisfaction. Yet, instead of a look of fear at her impending doom, the witch looked mildly disappointed. No, it won't. Raising her hand, a circle of magic appeared at her fingertips and a wave of blue fire erupted from it. I didn't even get to see what was happening to my soldiers in front of me as a wall of blue obscured them from sight, but I could hear screams of man and horse that quickly became silent. But that wasn't the same for the cavalry units encircling this settlement as large foxes with multiple tails rushed out from between the buildings to meet the soldiers with tooth and claw, or they used more cowardly magic to shoot any number of spells that instantly killed them. Looking back ahead, the wave of blue flames died down, leaving a field of scorched earth that had become a hardened like brick or turned to glass. There was absolutely no trace of any of the cavalry that had been caught in it. But gazing over to the soldiers that hadn't followed their comrades in the charge, their faces seemed ashen and horrified. For a battle that normally would have taken hours, it was ended in minutes. I couldn't understand how things had come to this. Such power shouldn't be possible. It had to be some kind of trick. The witch's voice erupted around the area once more. Those of you that were wise enough to not join your comrades in such unnecessary deaths, I still hold firm on my peacefully stay here to rest, recover, and tend to what remains of your comrades in any manner you see fit, or to leave. If you wish to speak further with me, then send a representative of your choosing to discuss about this cessation of hostilities. The meteor hovering over the largest group of cavalry moved slightly closer to them so as to punctuate the ultimatum. I heard the barking of orders from my remaining commanders to stand down and regroup. It made me vibrate in rage at how this pretentious bitch had cowed my entire army. I watched as my army came back together and the few remaining commanders deliberated amongst each other, along with my 10 fellow captives, while the bestial woman conjured a golden throne and sat in it. And insultingly, a multi-tailed fox would come to the witch and speak quietly with her or bring her refreshments. It took almost a half hour before a delegation of 2 men arrived. One was my commander, Ashton, and the other was my second commander, Leopold. Both men had grim expressions on their faces as they approached. Ashton gave a glance to me and the 10 other soldiers before focusing back upon the witch once more. Greetings, Fox Princess. I am Commander Ashton Baldric Carthil. Besides me is Commander Leopold Roland Reskel. We are here to discuss the terms of surrender along with the release of your current prisoners, Ashton stated as he and Leopold dismounted their horses. Surrender? I shouted incredulously as I almost felt my eyes bulge out of my head. We would surrender to this forest witch? The royal army of the Reestize Kingdom? Ashton looked at me, and I saw an unfamiliar anger stare back at me. Your Highness, almost a third of our original troop count fled the field when the Fox Princess summoned a meteor over our heads which, I might add, is still there. He emphasized the point by gesturing to said meteor. We lost 237 men from being immolated or slaughtered by foxes, 200 more who fled after seeing this massacre. A quarter of those that remain are openly speaking of what you've been accused of, with the rest speaking quietly about it. We've lost, Your Highness. I found myself speechless upon hearing this open defiance as Ashton looked back to the witch, continuing on. Lady Fox, would you be amenable to this? The witch nodded. Certainly, she said while waving her hand as a golden table and 2 matching chairs appeared in front of her. Would you care to take a seat? Both commanders seemed slightly startled at the sudden conjuring of this witch. Is this real gold? Leopold asked in astonishment as he removed his helmet to reveal his round face of salt and pepper hair alongside a goatee. Yes, and it is just a simple thing of which to conjure. The witch held out her hand over the table as a circle appeared at her hand and a large pile of gold coins filled her hand to the point of overflowing onto the table. She eventually ceased the magic and dropped whatever coins remained in her hand onto the decent pile of her conjured coins created. If you want, you can keep the gold since I do not need it. One of her tails gently swept the coins over to the 2 commanders who each picked one up and examined it. In their eyes, I could see a hint of greed that I would be a liar if I didn't also share such thoughts. If she truly was capable of conjuring more than just this, and it wasn't one of her illusions, then whoever controlled her would have the commerce of every country in their control. I could control the world with that power. And right now, she stood with my sister. Why didn't I ever get rid of the little bitch? She had interfered with things like the drug and slave trade which affected Hilma, and was it because I thought that she was insignificant when I could just focus on the throne, or is it because I had been afraid of what father might do? Perhaps both, but I now knew that I should have killed her. It's my throne. Mine. Not Zainak's, and not Rena's. I am the strongest and oldest, so it should be mine since that is what I deserve. So, what are your terms of surrender? As the witch asked this, both commanders ceased their observations on the gold and took a seat. Ashton began. Our soldiers need a day to rest before leaving as they, and their mounts, have been overworked getting here. Additionally, would you be amenable to removing the meteor hovering over our troops as they do rest here? This earned a nod from the witch. Before I make another request, can I ask what your intentions are for the kingdom? Is this place territory that you are claiming for yourself? You have no need to worry about if I'm trying to carve off chunks of your kingdom to rule for myself. Most of the people in this settlement are citizens of the Re-Estais kingdom. I'm here because they prayed to me for help. But that doesn't mean I have no intentions for the Re-Estais. As she said this, both of my commanders paled, earning a laugh from her. I promise you that it's nothing bad. The witch said in assurance, though I bit my tongue at everything I wished to say. I want to spread worship of myself throughout the kingdom. I also want to help fix many of the issues that are plaguing this kingdom. For instance, I've been hard at work dismantling 8 fingers, like Princess Rena has been doing, unlike many of your nobles. Additionally, I am ending the senseless bloodshed that your kingdom and the Baharuth have every year. What? I found myself exclaiming with the commanders. A part of me would be happy for the war to be ended, but that was only if I was the one to end it. It should be my glory that enters the annals of history of how I triumphed against the Baharuth Empire, not some bestial witch. How? Leopold inquired with astonishment. By taking to the field and preventing both sides from moving towards each other if necessary. I would prefer to accomplish this without any loss of life, but as Barbro has clearly demonstrated, the chains holding me in the air shook me. Sometimes, I need to get the point across with stick instead of the carrot. We understand, Lady Fox. We will ensure to tell King Ramposa about this mistaken act of hostility and inform him of your benevolent intentions and, if agreeable to you, potential for an alliance. I can't promise that anything might come from this as I do not speak for His Majesty, but we can put in a good word that would allow for further discussion. Leopold explained. The woman's lips could be seen growing into an amused smile through her veil. I would be interested in having a talk with King Ramposa about further ways we could work with one another. But I feel it will happen sooner than the time it would take you to inform the king of the events that have transpired, because, if we move on to prisoners, Barbro stays with me. That's non-negotiable. Lady Fox, please. If Prince Barbro were to be released, it would help immeasurably to convince His Majesty to work with you. Holding His Highness in captivity would only cause His Majesty to look at any talks you may have with suspicion and doubt. Ashton attempted to reason while I felt a cold sweat run down my neck at what may happen were I to be left in this witch's hands. I remembered clearly what happened to Alecto. The witch also knew my ties to 8 Fingers through Hilma. What would she do to me? She wasn't intimidated by force, as the witch didn't even take an entire army seriously. The witch also didn't care about my title, even less so with nobles who weren't even princes. Perhaps I can appeal to her kindness or, better yet, attempt to woo her enough to let me go. It might even be enough to end her backing for Renna and instead aid my rightful claim to the throne. After all, whatever magic and power the Fox Princess might have, she was still a woman underneath it all, with a weaker mind ruled by emotion. There might be a hurdle to overcome due to the attempt on her life, alongside my affiliations, but it was possible. Especially because seducing women has never been a challenge for me before. Wait, Fox Princess. I interrupted, turning the focus of my commanders and the woman on me as the chains holding me aloft in the air began to lower me to the woman's eye level. My commanders are correct that holding me hostage would be seen badly by my father. Boo the witch put a clawed finger to my lips to silence me. Barbro, you said more than enough for me to stand from you today. You are nothing more than a pig wearing a crown. All that comes from your lips are oinks and squeals with constant demands that everything be handed to you. No one has ever said no to you without being killed or punished for it. Forgetting how blatantly you went about insulting me and insinuating that you would fuck me, there's also your disregard for others' lives besides your own. As she said this, I saw her tails move over to me and begin ripping my armor off. Even if I were to ignore how much of a terrible human being you are, I can't ignore your ties to 8 Fingers. And I punish all of their members as a rule. As soon as the words left her lips, I renewed my struggles in my chains. Looking over to my commanders and other soldiers, they made no motion to help me. They stayed where they were and remained silent like cowards. I looked back to the woman, whose golden eyes were now glowering at me. I am a prince. You can't. I'm a goddess. Your point's invalid. She interrupted and put the tip of her nail to my nose. Since you're obviously a terrible human being, let's change you into something that you are actually good at being. Oink for me. Wow, I found the words stuck in my throat as my body felt warm while my clothes felt tight. Looking down, I quickly discovered why as my clothes began to stretch. Then, I felt like my fingers were sticking together, and when I looked, I was horrified to see my fingers were merging together into 2 stubby digits. As I tried to cry out in fear, a pig's squeal erupted from my throat. My clothes felt even tighter than before as my expanding body finally hit the limit of how much it could stretch before finally tearing, with the same occurring to my trousers as my boots fell from what my feet turned into. All the while, I continued to squeal and oink as I understood how this witch was debasing me. She was turning me into a pig. And with the elongated snout that I could see and feel growing on my face, it only confirmed the fact. It wasn't much longer until my body finished its horrid transformation as my limbs turned into stubby legs and my former clothes hung off of me in tatters. That was when she finally released most of the chains binding me, except for a single chain around my neck that acted as a leash. I tried to stand up, but my body felt too awkward and heavy for me to do so. Instead, I was forced to remain on all fours squealing for help that none of my soldiers would provide. What did you do to Prince Barbro? Ashton shouted in shock. I punished Barbro by turning him into a fitting form. For a punishment, this is quite light compared to what I've done to the other members of 8 Fingers. For instance, I'm fairly certain that one of them has starved to death at this point after being trapped in a gold statue for days on end, the woman explained, making me terrified as to what else she could have done to me. But that's just barbaric, Leopold stated. What's barbaric is to torture thousands of men, women, and children until their wills break before sending them off to be raped until their bodies are too worn out to be usable. What I've done is enact justice for all those wronged. I'm certain that you can understand my actions, considering that your government tends to execute members of 8 Fingers. The witch replied before looking to me, though, I could always go for a side of bacon if I'm feeling peckish. This caused me to squeal in fright. "Please, Lady Fox. I beg you to not harm His Highness, regardless of whatever he has done in the past." The witch gave an amused giggle, before sighing at Ashton's request. Then, I felt the chain around my neck pull me with a strength I couldn't resist until I was at the woman's side. She ominously rested her hand on my rag-covered back and lightly thrummed her claws on my skins, making me shiver in fear. "I was only jesting, Ashton. Worry not, Barbara will be perfectly safe in my custody when I take him with me to meet with your king." But as a consolation, the witch made a motion with her hand and the chain binding down the 10 other prisoners faded away, freeing all of them. "I will give you the other prisoners for free as a sign of my generosity." The former captives slowly stood up from the ground while rubbing feeling back into where their bonds had been. All the while, they looked at us, and especially me, with heavy tension on their features. The looks I received while trapped in this form were a mixture of humiliating and mortifying for someone of my station. I'm a prince. These low-born nobles and peasants shouldn't be looking down upon their prince. "Thank you, Lady Fox," Ashton said in gratitude, but that only left me burning with anger at how he could even be happy or thank this bitch when his prince was still trapped in the form of a swine while a prisoner. "But please, can you enlighten us on when you plan to speak with His Majesty and what you will do with His Highness? I will see Ramposa within the week. As for the royal swine? You just need to know that I don't plan on killing him anytime soon. Aside from this, I have nothing further that needs to be discussed with you on terms of surrender. You have nothing that I would want, aside from the criminal instigator that I've already made my prisoner," the witch stated with finality. As this happened, the meteor that had been hanging over the army broke apart into motes of blue light that eventually faded away, much to the amazement of the lowborn subjects of my army. "Since you plan to remain here for the day to rest and recover, I'm willing to offer your troops food and water if they need it." "That would be appreciated, Lady Fox," Leopold said with a nod. "Yet, why help what was once an enemy force like this? Most others wouldn't aid a defeated army in this way." "I'm not most others. And while I can be wrathful, I prefer to be kind and help others in need, as is the duty I have placed upon myself." My eyes glared at the witch. Kindness? No, she was just planning to fool the simple minds of the gullible lowborn. She was going to steal my throne, with the help of my traitorous sister. I shouted what accusations I could at the witch, but all that came out were more squeals and oinks until she turned her attention to me. "I don't understand, swine, piggy." She then looked to my commanders one last time, "but I believe that this is a good place for us to conclude this meeting. I'll have my people bring out supplies for your troops in a short while." The witch stood from her seat, alongside my daft commanders, and the chairs and table that had been sitting it dispersed, but the gold coins remained as they fell to the ground with loud jingling, drawing the gaze of the 10 soldiers who looked at the resting wealth with interest. A tugging was felt at my neck as the golden chain followed after the woman. I tried to fight against the pull, but this fat bestial form lacked the strength to do so. I tried begging my soldiers, with swinish cries, but all of them just gave me looks of pity or fear, with none moving an inch to aid me. Eventually, I was being dragged on the ground until I found my footing on the stubby limbs and crawled across the ground like a beast as I was forced to follow after the witch. This shouldn't be happening. I'm a prince. This shouldn't be happening. Nina. It had been over an hour since Mom had left suddenly in the middle of teaching us. She had been in the middle of going over the stabilization of spell arrays while forming the symbols inside of it with Nero and Tyr. As they learned this, I continued to try performing Kitsune illusion, to mixed results. At first, I had managed to get parts of my tail hidden, but large parts of it still remained visible alongside my eyes, ears, and fangs. Yet, it was good progress as I could feel how my mana flow was affecting the hidden parts of the limb. It was more just a matter of replicating that same success across more of my tail until it was fully hidden. Then, I'd apply that same lesson to the rest of my kitsune features until they were disguised as well. Before she left, while explaining that something was happening at the temple, she told us to continue practicing while she was gone. There was a multitude of worries that instantly came to mind on what may have happened, like another demon attacking, an undead army, or something else. At best, all we could do is just wait for Mom to return. How's the whole human disguise magic going for you? Nero asked as he glanced over to me while continuing to maintain just enough focus to continue powering his spell array. Both he and Tyr were doing well in that regard as they grew better at stabilizing their arrays. About as well as can be expected. I've mostly figured out the basis for hiding parts of my body. I just have to get used to applying it all at once. I answered while demonstrating my progress with half of my tail being fully hidden. Nero gave me a congratulatory smile. That's great. By the way, with you having been a mage a lot longer than Tyr and I, how long will it take us to start learning magic spells after getting this array stuff figured out? Even Tyr seemed interested as she flicked her eyes over to me. I gave both a sympathetic look. I'm not the best to ask about this since my talent allows me to cut down the time to learn spells by a huge amount. For most people, it could take weeks or longer to learn a 0-tier spell. It only gets longer the higher up the tiers you go. Really? That seems a bit ridiculous. Isn't it just about making some stable symbols with mana? Nero questioned. Not exactly. I began, it's an integral part when casting a spell, but that is still only just a part. Besides stable symbols that need to be memorized, there's also the precise amounts of mana needed at each section of the array along with the understanding of how to manipulate it. What makes learning spells so long is also related to an inherent aspect of mana. This time, Tyr was the one to ask, what might that be? The amount of mana that a spellcaster has access to each day, and the many hours it takes to regain that spent mana. I answered. For instance, most new mages, when trying to learn a new spell, have such a small mana pool that they may have 1 to 3 attempts to try casting a spell they just learned before they run out of mana and have to wait an entire day to try again. Does it at least get easier the more mana you have? Nero questioned. I nodded. Spellcasters able to cast spell of higher tiers generally have a faster time learning other spells of lower tiers since they have more mana, giving them more attempts to cast a spell in a day than weaker mages. I explained before adding, what's different for me, compared to other casters, is that I just have this innate ability to memorize the spell arrays I see and know when a spell I'm trying to cast is going to fail. That saves me time and mana needed to try and learn spells. I can't help but wonder if Kasha and her people are able to learn spells faster than us. Nero pondered, which I couldn't help but agree with. From how I've been getting taught, it seemed like Kitsune had better teaching methods compared to the Re-Estai's kingdom as least. Well, we'll have to master spell arrays first if we ever want to start working on actually learning spells. Tyr commented. That got a chuckle from Nero. Yeah, guess you're right about that. I found myself smiling at the interaction as Nero and Tyr went back to focusing on their spell arrays once again. Meanwhile, I continued to work on hiding my tail to start with. I found myself growing excited at each inch my tail became invisible. But with that excitement, also came the realization that I was already below half my mana pool. I'll have to ask Mom to cast Mana Font on me once she got back. Throughout this time, I couldn't help but notice that my body felt oddly warm, even though the temperature in the room was quite comfortable. To try and alleviate this, I ended up taking off my gloves and looping them onto my belt to keep them out of the way. I glanced over to Tyr and Nero and didn't see any discomfort on their features at the heat. That was odd. Pushing that away for later, I went back to practicing Kitsune illusion. It was a little bit later when a flash of gold appeared in the middle of the room and Mom stepped out, thankfully not looking any different than when she had left, though, mid-step, her clothes swapped from the goddess outfit of her to her usual black clothes. Sorry about the wait. Had to take care of a few things before I returned, Mom said with an easygoing grin. Tyr perked up at this as Nero watched in interest. What happened? Tyr asked. The Re-Estai's army came to the temple, led by Prince Barbaro, threatening to kill everyone. I had to get involved and try to prevent any unnecessary bloodshed. Sadly, Some of their soldiers died following orders from Prince Barbro. Mom replied with a disappointed tone. But her disappointment at the bloodshed couldn't compare to the shock Tyre, Nero, and I felt at hearing Mom fight the Reastize Kingdom's army. And, more specifically, Prince Barbro. What happened after that? I piped up as the three of us made our way over to Mom. Well, the nice way to answer it is that the conflict between the army and I ended, Mom said quickly. My eyes narrowed as this answer didn't exactly inspire confidence. And the bad way to answer it? Mom gave a wry grin. Prince Barbro was rude, entitled, and an all-around ass. He was also affiliated with 8 Fingers. I took him prisoner after informing his people about his crimes. Then, I turned him into a pig. The jaws of Tyre and I dropped, while Nero blinked and remarked, a royal swine? The man was a pig, so I thought his form should match his personality. Mom explained, which didn't exactly help calm me when the Prince of the Kingdom had just been transformed into an animal. Mom, you do realize that this is going to cause a diplomatic incident? What if the entire Reastize declares war on you because of this? I rapidly questioned. Mom simply walked up to me and gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. I'd like to see them try, she said confidently. But that's unlikely to be the case for a myriad of reasons. For instance, once news of Barbro's hidden affairs is known to the public, it will be hard for King Ramposa to justify a war for his rightly punished son among his subjects. Trust me, I've got this handled. I found myself sighing at how relaxed Mom seemed with all of this, but I ended up just accepting it since nothing could change what happened. I trust you, Mom. What did you end up doing with Prince Barbro? Tyre wondered. He's locked up in a temporary pig pen made just for him. But enough talk about his royal swine-ness. How have you 3 been progressing since I've been gone? Mom said as she changed the subject. Nero and I are getting closer to more consistently maintaining our spell arrays. Tyre answered for Nero and herself. I gave my answer by showing her my half-missing tail. Excellent work, you 3. Mom praised with a broad smile. But while I plan for the 3 of you to continue with your magical training today, I'll need to borrow you 2 for a little personal discussion, Mom said while pointing to Tyre and I, much to our confusion and curiosity. Why just us 2 and not Nero as well? I asked. Because it's matters related to Kitsune that Nero doesn't need to hear right now. Mom answered, making me slightly nervous. What does that mean? I kept silent as Mom looked over to Nero. You'll be good on your own for a bit, right? I'll be fine, Kasha. See you 3 in a bit. Nero waved off. Then Mom began to escort us out of the room. Tyre and I sat at a simple circular table with Mom in one of the palace's study rooms. Once we had all taken our place, I had to ask, can you tell us what this is all about? Since the pair of you are newly made or soon to be made kitsune, there's a few things that you should be aware of as part of the species. Mom answered. Oh. Tyre and I said together in understanding. To start with, here's a little history lesson. Foxes were originally created by my mother, Inori. At least, in all of Yggdrasil before it became connected to this realm, foxes were originally her creation. But over time, she required emissaries that could more easily interact and blend with the people who worshipped her or needed help. So, Inori searched all the realms for foxes that were the most devout to her before she blessed them with her power. This created the first kitsune. It started with 10 or so who were transformed. And they just multiplied until they became an entire race? I inferred. Mom nodded in answer. That probably took a while to grow to the numbers we're seeing now if Grandma didn't help out. Mom gave a sly grin and chuckle. Not as long as you might think. You've heard this, Nina, but Tyre hasn't. Mom began as she nodded to my sister. A few things you should know about kitsune biology is that regardless of whatever race a kitsune breed with, the resulting child will almost always come out as a kitsune, and if the child doesn't, then they'll eventually become one before the age of 10. The other thing of note is that foxes, which kitsune spawned from, typically have multiple kits in a litter. That helped explain how they could grow from a few members to a realm-spanning race within a short period of time. They produced large amounts of children, and all of those children were almost guaranteed to come out as kitsune. And thinking more about it, I felt my face heat up as I quickly realized that if I ever became pregnant in the future, then I was likely going to have multiple children. Yet, even with high birth rates, there have been events that have greatly cut our species' population down. One of them was when the dragon, Nidhogg, assaulted Yggdrasil and destroyed many realms in the process. Much of the realm of foxes was victim to this cataclysm. The branch holding it broke and Mom had to use most of her power to save as much of the realm as she could, weaving the remnant between two of the other branches of the world tree with Yggdrasil's assistance. My mind flashed to the small realm I had seen in that vision when I first drank Mom's blood, nestled between two of those large branches of the world tree. It had been held in place by tiny branches, vines, and roots, unlike the other realm being held up by branches. The second time this happened was during the war between the kitsune and dwarves. Conflict broke out over resources the dwarves wanted, alongside enslaving kitsune for pleasure, as a labor force, or to harvest from them, Mom said, making Ter and I cock out heads in question. Harvest from them? Ter asked. Like farmers harvesting meat, leather, and milk from a cow. Mom elaborated with a grim expression, filling us with fear at the thought. Our bodies are highly magical, both mortal and deity alike. And as the dwarves are crafters, they always sought out resources that could improve their crafting. Such as fur from our tails to make durable clothes, bones to be crushed to powder and mixed into their blades, blood to quench their weapons in the forge. How many died? I found myself asking. I'm not certain, but I know that it was plenty on both sides, especially when gods of the other realms got involved when the war began spilling out and affecting them. I wasn't alive when the war happened, and much of what I know has been told to me by Inori or other kitsune. What I do know is that the realm of foxes is still recovering from it. Other than that, you'd need to learn specifics from someone who was alive during the war. A spark of realization appeared in Ter's eyes before it died down. But before it did, I thought I could see her mouth out Saizo's name. And thinking about it, depending on how recent that war was, then it could be that most kitsune with 2 or 3 tails had been alive to see it. Now, continuing on from the topic of kitsune biology, Mom began, pulling me from my thoughts. While similar to humans in a lot of ways, we've got our obvious difference. As girls, we have our time of the month, except that we enter a cycle of heat that tends to make us more receptive to others. We're going to end up like you were a few weeks ago? Ter pointed out. Probably not. I'm a bit unique in that my mom's a fertility goddess while I'm also blessed by another fertility goddess. It boosts my instinctual urges to a major degree. If you say so. Anything else you need to tell us? I responded. Well, on the subject of ears and hearing. Later, after hearing more topics on kitsune biology that I already knew but Ter didn't, we eventually rejoined Nero, who had remained hard at work improving on his spell array's stability. It was near the end of the day that I managed to fully hide my tail. Tomorrow, I'd work on my ears, eyes, and teeth before finally trying to attempt the entire transformation at once. It was after all of this that we had dinner and I finally went off to my room and tried practicing Foxfire Will-O-Wisp for a while to use up all of my mana like Mom had recommended I do. Yet, try as I might, I kept finding myself getting distracted, like my body wanted to do something but my mind couldn't figure out what it was. I also still felt warm, even in my sleepwear. After a long enough time at failing to concentrate for this, I gave up and used up all of my mana in a large ball of Foxfire until I ran out. Then, I went to sleep. I found myself in the confines of a dark cave that appeared to have no obvious exit. The 2 paths that I could take led to further darkness. With no good option to go with, I took the right path and began walking down it. The floor of stone and earth was cold on my bare feet, and an icy chill filled the cave that my nightwear couldn't block me from. I couldn't understand why I was here when I had just been in my bed moments prior, Each step I took caused the hairs on the back of my neck to stand up as the fur on my tail bristled. This cave seemed empty, so why was I feeling this odd terror? Was I even alone? "Hello?" I called out, hoping that nothing would answer me from the darkness. "Nina." My heart began pounding at the voice echoing from ahead of me as a pair of yellow dots appeared from the darkness and the stomping of metal boots told me she was getting closer. "I told you that I'd come back and finish what I started." As if to punctuate her threat, a green glow appeared in her left hand, highlighting the right side of her armored form in the darkness of the cave. "Albedo." I quickly began backing away from the demoness as she continued marching towards me in a slow and steady pace. Each step punctuated by a loud metallic echo that made my heart beat all the faster. "Why, you're gone. Mom locked you away," I said in denial. This couldn't be real. She couldn't be here. It wasn't enough. "Stay where you are, Horseborn. I'll make you my pet soon enough." As she got closer, the seam in her helmet's visor widened until it split apart and began moving like a set of jaws as laughter escaped from it. Before I could back away any further, I found my back touching something. When I attempted to pull away, I found myself stuck in place, and looking over my shoulder, I found out why, as I was now stuck in a wall of webs that had formed from behind me. And from different corners of the cave, multiple sets of eyes glowed before the spider women crawled out from the shadows along the web, growing closer to me with their jaws split apart and dripping venom. "No. No. Don't worry, Horseborn." My attention was drawn forwards as Albedo stood in front of me with her ring-covered hand getting closer to my face and glowing more intensely. "It will only hurt for a moment, then you won't even remember." I saw the ring get closer to me as I started screaming. My vision was completely covered in that sickly green glow. I sat up on my bed covered in sweat while heavily breathing. My eyes flickered around my surroundings to see that I was in my room in the palace. It was all just a nightmare. It wasn't real. Just a bad dream, I said to myself in reassurance as I got out of bed. The urge to sleep had long since left me. The spiders are dead, and Albedo was locked away. "They can't hurt you." This mantra was repeated a few more times until my heartbeat finally slowed down and didn't feel like it was about to burst from my chest. "They're gone. All of those monsters are gone. Yet even so, why did they still have to haunt my dreams like this? Why couldn't I just escape them in my sleep as well?" Moving to the door of my room, I opened it and let the light of the hallway stream into my room, helping to banish the dark thoughts of those monsters as I stepped out of my room and into the hallway. For a moment, I found myself lost on where I wanted to go until I made my decision. Walking through the hallway, it wasn't long until I ended up in front of the door to the room that Nero was staying in. On approach, I raised my hand up in preparation to knock on the door until I found myself becoming hesitant. I couldn't decide if I should attempt to wake him or not since he could still be sleeping. Maybe I should just let it go and not drag someone else into my case of insomnia. Just as I was about to lower my hand and walk away, the door's handle suddenly twisted before opening to reveal the blonde standing there with a look of surprise on his face. "Nina? What are you doing here?" I hesitated for a moment to answer as it made me feel a little self-conscious, but I finally swallowed that nervousness down and spoke. "You mentioned yesterday for me to see you if I ever had another case of insomnia." Nero chuckled and scratched the back of his head. "I did, didn't I? Bad dream, I take it?" I nodded. "You as well?" I asked. "Same." Nero answered before giving me a friendly smile. "Up for another walk again?" "I am if you are," I said with a smile in return. Nero then stepped out of his room and closed the door behind himself. Then, we both started walking the hallways with nowhere particular in mind to go to. "Did the same nightmare keep you up like it did last night?" "Yeah." Nero admitted with a hint of hesitation, "Bad memories that just won't leave me. Though, I'm not the only one in my village that has been haunted by bad memories in their sleep." Nero's answer made me look at the blonde with a curious look. "Why are people in your village haunted by nightmares?" I questioned. That earned a glance in turn from Nero. I'm not certain how much you've been told by Kasha, but we were attacked by demons a few weeks ago. It was extremely traumatic, and some of the villagers that hadn't chosen to have their memories of the torture they went through removed have had some issues sleeping. I remembered being told by Mom that she had saved the village from demons, but she had avoided going that far into detail about it. I'm sorry that you and the people of your village had to go through that, I said in sympathy. It's fine, Nina. We were saved in the end. Not all of us may have made it, but I am extremely appreciative of those that I still have, Nero said, though there was a heavy sorrow in his eyes that the blonde couldn't hide. He seemed to wish to change the subject as he asked, so, I didn't ask much about it yesterday, but what's being an adventurer like? Any good stories? That got me smirking. If I'm going to be honest, my early adventuring career was extremely stale, like most other copper plates. I'd get dull missions like clearing out a few undead from the cemetery, hunt a wolf or two, retrieve ingredients. It was when I got to the rank of silver plate with my teammates that we were given more interesting missions. I explained. So, as a silver plate, what would you say was the most exciting job you've done? Technically, I'm a gold plate now. Got promoted just a few days ago after my team, and I hunted down a bunch of bar guests which were different from the normal monsters we fought before. I think it's got to do with how smart they are, since they work together better than the goblins or ogres we've defeated before. Resting my chin in my hand, I thought about it for a moment before adding, as for interesting. Well, a few days after we hunted the bar guests, we got into a massive fight against two undead armies led by some liches alongside some slain theocracy soldiers, re-estais soldiers, kitsune, and adventurers. I'm also positive that a dragon or two showed up. Nero blinked with his jaw dropped. Is that a normal occurrence for the re-estais? Oh, yes. We deal with undead armies quite often. Isn't it the same in the Baharuth? I answered completely seriously. Nero's eyes were wide at this point, and I snorted at his surprise and laughed. I'm just joking. Even for the re-estais, that was an extremely uncommon event. Nero gave off a sigh of relief at that revelation. Okay, you got me with that one, Nero stated with a laugh of his own. I found it slightly surprising that joking about that day helped to make it more palatable for the events that happened soon after. The unconscious soft wagging of my tail also helped to confirm my thoughts. I have to have some way of teasing you, Ruthie, I said with a grin. Then I'll make sure to remember to pay you back for that, Reezy. Nero promised with a grin in turn. So, is that the only interesting tale you've got? There was the time that my team and I found out that a troop of goblins was living and working with one of the outskirt villages as their protectors, I said, recalling that weird moment. I wondered how Carney Village has been doing since we last saw it. Nero's eyebrow rose up and he gave me a narrowed look. Even if you say that your country is normal, everything I've heard right now tells me otherwise. My shoulders shrugged, no idea on what to tell you about that. Maybe the Baharuth Empire is just boring in comparison. We both began laughing at my remark. It went like this for a while after, where I told him a few more interesting jobs I've done as an adventurer until we eventually parted ways and went back to our rooms after the urge for sleep became too overpowering. Have a good night, Nina, Nero said in farewell. You as well, Nero. See you in the morning. Theo Ruksha. Day 41. It had taken almost a month, but we finally arrived at the capital faster than I had originally expected. But it did help that my fellow guildmaster, Martimus Darwill, had been extremely receptive to the revelation of the Fox Princess, though to me, she would always be my mistress, Kasha Blanc. Martimus was an intelligent man, one had to be if they were to run any branch of the Magicians' Guild. That intelligence allowed him to understand the truth I spoke when I revealed the tome and a small flask of the elixir made from Lady Kasha's blood. I watched with excitement as he skimmed through the pages of the tome, with realization dawning upon his face. I became elated when Martimus decided to drink some of the elixir, enhancing his mana and spellcasting as he felt that divine connection to Lady Kasha in that instant. It might not be as intense as that of Lady Kasha's maidens, but it was still enough for any person to realize that Lady Kasha is real. From there, I gave him what teachings from the tome we had that some of my mages had dutifully copied down during the journey to the capital. Alongside this was the bottle of elixir and the knowledge on how to produce more of the substance from the small amount left in the flask I had given him. My mistress' blood was an amazing substance of magic and divinity. Using only a small drop of blood from the original flask that she had given us, one needed to mix it into water that was infused with highly concentrated mana. From there, Lady Kasha's blood would almost seem to spread out from its point of initial contact with the water. It was as if her mana was consuming the mana within the water before replacing it with her own. This process would take less than 20 minutes, faster if those making the water prayed over it. From there, this elixir could be mixed with more quantities of mana-infused water to produce the same result. It was both fascinating and captivating to watch happen. We had tested to see if this would also happen to regular water, but nothing seemed to occur until prayer was sent to the water. Sadly, the potency was lessened unless more mana was infused into that water, whereupon the blood in the elixir would absorb and convert that mana. It made me ponder if a similar process might be possible for the blood of any who consumed the elixir. It would be something to investigate at a later time. After this fortuitous meeting with Martimus, he gifted us supplies for the rest of the way to the capital, along with a message stamped in wax with his seal to be given to the Grand Guildmaster. During our continued trek to the capital, all of us who were magically attuned felt a massive burst of mana as a golden pillar rose into the air from many miles away towards Rantel. We all knew that this was Lady Kasha's doing as we were more than familiar with it. What we didn't understand was why, at first. It was when Teresia, another of Lady Kasha's maidens, said that she felt our goddess had grown in power, that we finally understood. That night, we had all been almost celebratory as it meant that our devotion to our goddess was working. That only hurried our pace with a renewed vigor. And since then, I've noticed that Teresia's eyes have become more golden since that night. Upon making it through the gates of the capital, we had been surprised at the activity on the streets that was impossible to miss. There was talk of Princess Rena personally heading an assault upon all of Eight Fingers' operations. There was talk of nobles being arrested who had been working with said organization. But all of this seemed to stem from a singular connection. Supposedly, the king's cousin, Alecto, had actually been the leader of the entire organization. The talk of how this had been discovered seemed to vary in version or scope. Some say that he arrived in a portal from hell, turned into a grotesque creature of flesh and gold. Another said that he had been tortured by a goddess before arriving in a flash of light. A different tale said he had been turned into a throne, before a monster dropped him in the middle of the throne room and disappeared. But all of them agreed that it had been a punishment inflicted upon him by the goddess known as the Fox Princess, where he then gave up everything he knew of the group he had once run. Regardless of the truth, it meant that Lady Kasha has decided to reveal herself to more of the kingdom. This excited me, but also filled me with worry at the way the church was now fully alert about a new goddess. Already, we noticed that a few priests were out on the streets preaching the gospel of the four great gods, as if this would be enough to get everyone to forget about Lady Kasha. Further thoughts on dealing with the church would have to be put on hold until after my meeting with Grand Guildmaster Arlen Zamicus. As our group arrived at the large marble building of the capital's branch of the Magicians' Guild, we carefully unloaded the chest containing both the flask of Lady Kasha's blood and the tome of her teachings. 2 mages carried the chest while I and Teresia led from the front and the rest of the mages followed behind. Upon entering through the guild's entrance, I was happy to note that Arlen was already waiting for us in the entrance hall. To the side, the black-robed mages manning the visitors' counter were looking at us with immense curiosity. They were not the only ones, as any guild member in the area was equally as curious at the arrival of a group of mages from the Rantel branch. It wouldn't be that surprising if some of them were able to sense the powerful mana being emitted from what we carried. I know that Arlen was able to do so as his normally tanned face was pale, with a cold sweat running down the side of his face. Amusingly enough, almost like a surprised cat, the hair of his long, white beard was untidy and raised when I knew it to normally be kept neat and well combed. Arlen was a tall man, at almost 6.5 feet, but he seemed smaller now with the way he seemed to shrink into himself at our approach, and the closing distance of Lady Kasha's blood. Guildmaster Theo Ruksha, I would like to say that it's a pleasure to see you after so long, but I can feel that you have brought an object of extraordinary magical power with you. What have you brought to my guild? Arlen asked with a hardened gaze as he met my eyes. We will need a place of complete privacy for me to show you, Grand Guildmaster Arlen. I replied calmly. Arlen nodded and motioned for us to follow. I gave a silent command to my mages, and we all followed after Arlen. We went with him through the hall, moving around the statue of blue crystal in the form of a robed figure casting a spell. This had once been Gavlin the Dauntless until a tragic accident turned him to crystal. He remained here as an overt warning to mages of the guild on the dangers of untested magical research. It was both a morbid and effective warning, as there had been a significant decrease in magical accidents among the newer mages of the capital's guild branch. At least, that is what I've heard. Since this wasn't my branch, I couldn't verify if that was the truth or not. Eventually, Arlen took us to a stairway that went further down under the guild proper. The stairway down was made up of walls of stone inscribed with runes, as copper helped to reinforce it. To reassure you, Theo, Arlen began, this underground facility, which also houses the guild's repository of knowledge and artifacts, is the most secure place in all of the city. It's made of a mixture of an outer sheath of copper that's been enchanted with wards to repel scrying attempts, an alloyed skeletal frame of mithril and steel, followed by an inner sheath of warded granite that is reinforced with more copper. Besides being some of our greatest work in repelling arcane methods of spying, it is also extremely durable and can repel all but the most powerful attempts to breach it. To hear about the layers of security that had been designed was impressive, to say the least. Even gazing at the stonework, I found it far smoother than was possible with normal tools. Were earth spells used to form the granite? I asked in interest. While I have visited this capital's guild branch on a few occasions, I've never had the chance to tour this section of the build. I actually helped to give me a few ideas on security implementation in the Reestize branch. Good eye. Arlen confirmed. Yes, we had a team of mages specialized in earth magic to form the stone. Magic was used, instead of tools, because it made the work faster and more perfected, in addition to reducing the immense costs already being taken up by the mithril. How did you manage to afford the costs for the mithril? Even with guild funds, the amount it would take to create framing for an entire underground facility would be astronomical. I questioned with great interest. Part of it was me wondering if this branch had much greater hidden funds than the Reestize branch. The other part pondered if he knew a supplier that gave him a massive discount. Arlen looked over his shoulder and gave me a wry grin, his eyes constantly flickering to the chest behind me. While I can't fully say since my source needs to remain hidden, just know that they were able to acquire the smallest amount of mithril necessary to accomplish this project without bankrupting the guild while doing so. It was very odd to hear him say this. Additionally, the only place known for having a large amount of mithril with an industry build to mine it was in the Azalisia Mountains by the Dwarven Kingdom. And even then, the Dwarven Kingdom has had extremely limited trade with the Reestize Kingdom due to a lack of interest from the Reestize's leadership. Actually, the only ones that they had good trade relations with was the Baharuth Empire. Did Arlen have some other hidden trade deal with the dwarves that no one else knew of, or could it be that he knew of where some hidden deposit of mithril could be found within the kingdom's borders? Unfortunate, but understandable. I acknowledged as diplomatically as I could. Once at the bottom of the stairs, we stopped at a doorway of pure metal that seemed a mix of steel and mithril. Just this door alone could probably afford an entire mansion. Yet, I could understand the amount of money and effort that went into just the door, considering how many extremely dangerous objects of power were locked within. I couldn't help but think that we were being led down here, instead of in one of the easier-to-access offices upstairs, because Arlen was afraid of what we carried. Carved into the door was an odd set of symbols that seemed to be made of a multitude of rounded dimples in the metal that formed into a star-like symbol. Arlen then reached for his neck and pulled out a spherical object of what looked to be orichalcum tied to a metal chain of steel. With a practiced ease, he unhooked the object from his neck and began inserting the object into different dimples of the door and making a few twists of what I assumed was a key each time. Arlen did his best to hide whatever actions he made, and once he had finished, the symbols on the door lit up blue with mana. Then, the door slid aside with a grinding noise of stone against metal. Looking further within, there was a hallway split into different doorways that had more of those symbols on them. Along the walls were lanterns lit by flames that I could only guess were kept alight by an enchantment that absorbed ambient mana in the air and powered themselves through it. Theo, as per protocol of entering the first vault defenses, I can only allow you, as a guild master, and those whose backgrounds have been thoroughly investigated and verified, entrance into this place. I nodded in understanding and turned to my subordinates. I understand. Hand me the chest and wait for my return. The two mages holding the chest brought it to me and allowed me to take it from them. The weight pulled on my arms, but I could carry the precious cargo the rest of the way. Teresia, you will be in charge of the others while I speak with Grand Guildmaster Arlen. She nodded in reply. Understood, Guildmaster Theo, once said. She, and the rest of my subordinates went back up the stairs, leaving Arlen and I alone. Once Arlen was satisfied, he motioned me to follow and we walked inside. The moment I stepped inside, Arlen put his key into a slot in the wall and the door slid back into place behind us. With this, we walked to the first door reachable in the hallway that Arlen unlocked with his key. Then, we entered into the room where a table of stone sat in the center while the walls held numerous arcane conduits, weapons, and a few scrolls. Please, set the chest on the table. Arlen requested. Doing as Arlen requested, I set the chest down and gently opened it to reveal my mistress' bottled blood that glowed in the confines of the chest, alongside the tome that she had given me. Following this, I stepped aside and allowed Arlen to approach the chest and gingerly reach a shaky hand out to lightly touch the glass holding the blood. Theo, please, tell me what this is. Arlen asked tensely as his gaze remained fixed upon the golden blood. There's more mana within just this liquid than there has been in any mage I've ever seen or any of the objects that have ever been locked in the vault. Arlen, how much have you heard about the being known as the Fox Princess? I lightly prodded as I wanted to know how well he would take what I said next, depending on his next response. This made the elder mage quickly turn and gaze at me, and it seemed that his eyes scanned my form for a moment before finally meeting mine. What I know is from everything I've heard from His Majesty. A mage of mine was sent to try and free His Majesty's cousin from an enchantment put upon him to no success. I was called in to investigate it after this first failure, but none of the spells I knew or the objects I used had any effect. What I do know about the Fox Princess is her claims of divinity. Before I set out for the capital, I had an expedition led into the great forest of Tob after a massive structure in the form of a stone tree had been spotted. It was originally believed that this may have been caused by a powerful relic of magic, but we were quickly proven wrong when we became surrounded by intelligent magical foxes with multiple tails. They led us to the Great Lake where we found a palace of gold built at the foot of this tree. I leaned against the table and smirked to myself in amusement. None of us had been prepared to find an actual goddess inside this palace. We spoke with her, and the Fox Princess confirmed that she had been the one to create this tree with a spell of a tier beyond the 10th. A sharp intake of breath was heard from Arlen before I continued. We wanted to know more from her, to even trade knowledge of spellcraft with her, and she showed interest as well. That was when I pointed to the bottle that Arlen's fingers were still lightly touching, but she wished to know of our powerful spells, and when I told her that it would require speaking with you and proof to even access our more esoteric knowledge, she conjured that bottle with pure magic and cut her hand before filling it with her blood. Arlen's eyes comically widened as his gaze turned back to said blood. You're saying that this pure concentration of mana in liquid form is actually blood? I nodded in answer. More than just that, but to explain that portion, I have to explain the book. I said with a gesture of my hand. Arlen quickly took the book from the chest and opened it before flipping between the pages. With each second passing, his hands trembled more as his eyes became filled with a look of hunger that I was familiar with. An urge to know more. Arlen somehow managed to pull his attention away from the pages of the book with a good deal of effort and gazed at me. There are tomes locked away in the vault that are filled with knowledge which could potentially kill many, possibly even destroy this city, if a mage with enough power and talent could understand the tomes and learn the spells. And yet, Arlen closed the book and waved it at me. This tome is so detailed and meticulous that I bet one could learn the spell within a year or two. It says that, Greater Slow, is a 4th tier spell. Texts on spells of 4th tier and above are either esoteric at best and maddeningly unhelpful at worst. Yet this one isn't. Do you understand the amount of power there is in this? The amount of danger? He questioned. My eyes slightly narrowed in question. Danger? While all magic carries risk, this knowledge isn't dangerous, it's miraculous and could change the world of spellcraft as we know it by implementing teachings from it to entirely different spells. I responded. Arlen set the book back into the chest and rubbed his brow for a moment. The danger I speak of, Theo, is that knowledge like this could be learned by any 2-bit mage lacking sense. If powerful and destructive spells were easy for mages to access, then the world would likely be in great peril if some lunatic was to gain access to this knowledge. Perhaps nothing would happen, or perhaps this lunatic would discover a way to prolong the effects of Greater Slow, to slow down the growth of a field of crops. All knowledge can be dangerous in the wrong hands. I countered. Yes, but magic can have much dire consequences if used for dubious ends. One of the positives for the length of time it typically takes to learn spells is that it weeds away those without discipline and whose thoughts are only about instant gratification of power. While this doesn't prevent every callous mage from learning a spell, it does prevent a greater number of these callous mages from ever getting to that point. Where did you get this? My superior's tone on this subject worried me, but I answered him, if only to try and help convince Arlen that he was overthinking this knowledge. I was able to get a personal audience with the Fox Princess after she gave us her blood. She agreed to give me the tome of her knowledge on just that spell as a test. From there, it led to both mine, and many others' revelations on her divinity. Enough so for us to found a new belief around her. For a moment, Arlen froze as he processed my words. She has this much knowledge on spells? Yes. She is a goddess of magic. And this belief? Arlen asked. As mages, we once had no god or goddess of magic. Where those who find worship in the Four would get power from faith, mages had no one to truly turn to. We founded a faith that believes in the one deity that cares about magic, that we have actually seen walk among mortals. And if that isn't enough to believe, then the elixir can help quell any doubts. I explained as I pulled out a vial from my robe of the golden water and held it to Arlen. This is her blood. He commented with a flicker of his eyes from the blood in the chest and the vial in my hand. What have you done? Originally, we experimented with a little of the blood to better understand its properties. We found that, when placed in mana-infused water, just a drop of the blood would absorb and convert the mana in the water into more of itself, hastened if one were to pray to the blood. And then, we decided to drink it, and that was when we became enlightened and enhanced. Theo, you drank a substance that converted differing sources of mana into more of itself? Do you understand the absolutely massive risks that such a thing could do? What it still might be doing to you? Arlen questioned, which I nodded to. Yes, I did. And yet, I wasn't afraid when I drank it. And the benefits I, and the others who have drunk it, attained were more than worth it. I stepped over to the older mage and gently put my hand on his shoulder in reassurance. Any who have consumed it have had their mana increased, and their spells made easier to cast, with a few women being enhanced even further, marked by a golden ring in their eyes. Mages have spent centuries looking for ways to increase their mana and ability through potions and elixirs. Most have failed in this task, received barely enough reward for the amount of effort it took, or the ingredients have long since gone extinct. We finally found something that does it all. What more could we ask for? Arlen shook his head. What more could we ask for? What more could she ask for? Everything you've shown me is everything that we could ask for, but sometimes things are too good to be true. Freely given power like this is never truly for free. Please, Arlen. This isn't one of those moments. The Fox Princess is benevolent, and I have spoken with her enough to know for certain. And more than that, she might be the one thing that can save our kingdom from the Baharuth. Since we're both smart men, we know how the constant war with them is going to end, I said, attempting to appeal to his sense of logic. The elder mage slowly brushed my hand off his shoulder and slowly paced to the wall, looking tiredly at the artifacts hanging upon it, and instead of the Baharuth taking over, we could have a different tyrant's boot at our necks. We need to study these items, potentially look into a way of dealing with this woman if necessary, and try to undo what has been done in mistaken haste. Likely, we will have to study the woman with golden eyes that you brought along with you on why the blood affects her like this, which can hopefully tell us how to undo this. My eyes fully narrowed in suspicion at Arlen. What are you talking about, Arlen? Why would we undo this? This is a blessing that we need, not one to push away and reject. Perhaps I was mistaken coming here if you aren't willing to see reason and realize what good this would do for us, I said with disappointment. You were far from wrong to come here, Guildmaster Theo. What you've informed me is of immense help to the Magician's Guild, especially when it alerts me as to how much of a problem and threat that this Fox Princess is. Arlen responded, receiving a shake from my head as I closed the lid of the chest and prepared to pick it up. For once, I had been unable to convince one of my colleagues, especially one with as much weight to his voice as Arlen. I thought that he, of all people, would be absolutely ecstatic about such a development. Turns out that I was wrong. My people and I shall be leaving since I fear that we're never going to find common ground on this. I appreciate the time you took to hear me out, Grand Guildmaster. Leave that chest where it is, Theo. I slowly turned my head to look at Arlen with his back still facing me. What? That chest contains a powerful magical artifact and a tome of knowledge that is too dangerous to be allowed to the public, Arlen said calmly. Arlen, while you may be my superior, these items are property of the Rantel branch of the Magician's Guild. They aren't staying here. I replied with an even tone. To be fully honest, despite the calm front I was putting up, my heart was pounding in my chest. I had never believed that I would ever have to stand up to the Grand Guildmaster in my life like this, but I was the head of the Rantel branch. While I may listen and obey some of his orders, my duty was to my branch of the guild in addition to the kingdom. And most recently, also to my mistress, Kasha. Additionally, Arlen added, you and your people will also need to remain here. We can't allow for those infected by this substance to walk around freely until we understand more about it. Along with this, we will need to know who else you may have infected with this substance before you came here. I found my jaw slightly dropping as I felt taken aback at what the elder mage was saying. This jest of yours is made in very poor taste. My people aren't staying here, and neither am I. I warned while moving to pick up the chest. Theo, Arlen said sadly, and I found myself turning to look at the man. I'm trying to protect the guild. And while you see salvation with this Fox Princess, I see damnation compared to if we are ruled by the Baharuth who we already know. My head cocked at this. The Baharuth were an enemy who planned to conquer us while the Fox Princess wished to aid us. It was extremely obvious to know which side was better for this kingdom. Arlen, please Zhu. I'm sorry it's come to this. He turned around with a wand in his right hand. My eyes widened in shock, Arlen. And before I could react, a blue light filled my vision. Naya's Wednesday Part 1. Earlier. Naya. Day 33. Waking up, I found myself startled at the face of a massive raven leaning over me and taking up all of my vision. Gah. I found myself crying out and slightly backing away until I realized that it was just Hugin. I still have to get used to the massive bird, which was probably going to take a while. But instead of being insulted by my reaction, Hugin began to make a cawing laugh. One-eyed girl is frightened, Do I see? One-eyed girl is amusing me. Feeling the racing of my heart slow back down, I pushed myself into a sitting position and gave the raven an apologetic look. Sorry about that. I'm still not fully used to being around a giant raven just yet. I explained in apology. Hugin eventually stopped his cawing laughter and stuck his beak into a small black portal he conjured before pulling it out along with a vine of berries. Dropping it into my lap, Hugin made a short hop away to give me space before he sat down and gazed at me with his one eye. Thanks for the food, I said appreciatively and picked a few berries from the vine before I began eating them. The moment my teeth crushed into the skin of the berries, my mouth was filled with a pleasingly sweet taste. In between bites, I managed to ask, "What will we be doing today?" Hugin gave me a cock of his head and a few clicks until he answered, "One-eyed girl will break her fast. Then, by feather and limb, we make to the wall where man attempts to prevent their downfall. Thoughtful One will be with one-eyed girl to aid her in task given by Father, Creator, Odin." I nodded in understanding and swallowed the berries in my mouth so that I could speak. Not that I'm ungrateful for you assisting me, but I think that other humans will be a little intimidated at the sight of a giant raven. A warbled chuckle came from Hugin's beak. Worry not, one-eyed girl. Thoughtful One will accompany you in one form or another. Only worries one-eyed girl should have is that of being Father, Creator, Odin's voice. Thoughtful One and Mindful One may see and inform, but one-eyed girl is the one that communicates. No need to remind me about that, Hugin. I'm still trying to decide on what I'm going to even say to others. I commented after finishing the last of the berries and throwing the bare vine aside. With a breath, I stood up and had to steady myself as it felt strange to walk about with half of my vision missing. Besides strange, there was also a great feeling of vulnerability that an enemy could hit me in my blind spot and I wouldn't know until it was too late. And besides a weakness in combat, my decidedly average skill with the bow was going to suffer with the lack of my left eye. This was going to be an adjustment period that I didn't have the luxury to prolong. Kneeling down, I picked up my cloak and slightly fumbled putting it over my left shoulder before I accomplished the task and almost reflexively went for my bow until I remembered that I had lost it at the tree. With it gone, I went for my sheathed sword and belted it to my waist as my final action in preparation for departure. Then, I turned to look at Hugin. The massive raven was already standing up and ruffling his feathers as he waited for me. Come, one-eyed girl. Dawdle not, Hugin said in a warbled hum before hopping to the cave's entrance. I followed after him and was greeted to the bright daylight that made me shield my eye until I grew accustomed to the brightness. Looking at our surroundings, nothing about this place seemed familiar to me. There were hills, yes. But the area was also filled with multiple normal trees that I couldn't recall seeing anywhere on prior scouting missions I've taken. But I couldn't ponder this any further as Hugin stuck his head between my legs and lifted me off the ground, with a yelp from me, until I sat firmly on the back of his neck with my legs hooked on his wings' shoulders. You could have told me that you planned to carry me. Another warbled laugh came from Hugin. Faster than waiting for one-eyed girl to clamber upon this thoughtful one. Hugin replied. Yet, before he could spread his wings and take flight, we were greeted to the ethereal form of Odin standing before us with an amused smile. It is good to see you beginning your journey, Naya Odin speaker. Breaking from my surprise at the unexpected appearance of my god, I bowed my head as deeply as I could in respect. Of course, my lord. We make for the wall with utmost haste to follow your command. The elderly god nodded in acknowledgement. Good to hear it. But before you two arrive at the wall, I'd request you to look over the corrupted tree so that we can see if any changes have happened. This enemy is one we must be wary of, as you wish it, Father, Creator, Odin. Your thoughtful one and the one-eyed girl shall glance upon this bastardization. Hugin replied with a bow of his head. Thank you. I'll be with you watching in great interest, so I wish you safe passage. With these words, Odin's ethereal form shimmered out of sight, but I could still feel his presence around us. Hugin then flapped his wings and warned, Prepare yourself, one-eyed girl. You traverse the realm of wind and sky this day. I found myself gripping his feathers as tightly as I felt was comfortable for the raven, then he quickly beat his wings and launched us into the sky. I was frightened at the speed we went as Hugin continued climbing up in the sky. My eye watered at the cool winds buffeting my face, but we eventually stopped climbing the air and leveled out into a stable glide, with Hugin flapping his wings every few moments to keep us aloft. Look, one-eyed girl, at the kingdom of land. Experience the gaze that the sovereigns of sky look upon each day. Hugin recommended with an amused joy. Cautiously, I looked over Hugin's neck and found whatever fear I had previously been driven out by the absolute wonder of the world below. Everything looked so small from this height, so much closer than it truly was. And far off in the distance, possibly 100 or more miles away, was the tiny white line stretching the distance that was the kingdom's protective wall. I was lucky enough to be given a sight that most others would never witness in their entire lives. It feels small, but so freeing, I shouted over the wind in my ears. Yes, unbound from the earth, one loses the shackles holding them in place, one-eyed girl, Hugin declared with an excited caw as we sailed through the sky. It was astonishing how what would take weeks, took us less than an hour to get closer to the walls, which I was able to look over and see all the forts, keeps, villages, and more of Roblé. Yet, despite this liberated feeling, my mind was drawn back to reality as Hugin made a turn in the air and began to lightly descend until my eye spotted the large patch of crimson on top of a hill. I could tell, even from this distance, that the tree had gotten bigger. Yet, despite the size of the tree, what I found more worrying were the roots spread out around the tree that now grew above the ground and covered that hill, along with parts of the hills surrounding it. The roots even had a greater number of cocoons than last I saw it. But my eye quickly trailed on the 3 cocoons that had once been my squad mates. A great deal of regret weighed on my heart as none of them had deserved the fate they endured. To be little more than nourishment for a horrific monstrosity. It's gotten bigger, I commented with a dry tone. Like a weed, it grows unwanted, but triumphant against all who would see it felled. Hugin added. We circled the tree a few times more, reinforcing that growing ominous feeling I had about this place. I think we've seen enough. Let's leave this place, I said with no further wish to continue subjecting myself to this unease. Not yet. Something is happening down there. As soon as Odin said this, the eye of Hugin and I scanned the area until we finally spotted a cocoon that seemed to shiver and shake as the roots forming it began to move like a bundle of snakes until they finally separated and released what they had once held. And looking at it, I felt an abject disgust well up within me as I witnessed what was once an orc crawl to its feet with roots slithering throughout its form. A few tendrils arced from its back like the stinger of a scorpion, while one of its arms had almost broken off from the creature's body, held together by a thick crimson root as the limb trailed at its feet. I watched as its other arm seemed to snap under the movement of a few roots, eliciting a cry of pain. By all accounts, this creature should be dead with all the roots poking out from its body, yet it managed to persist. Even hundreds of yards in the sky, we heard the gurgled roar of the creature, like an infant's first cry as it was birthed into the world. Yet, what we witnessed was a perversion of birth. One that twisted, altered, and mocked such an event. Then, we watched as the creature seemed to gallop into a mass of roots, its legs snapping under it from the movements of the roots covering them, before diving headfirst into the mass without an ounce of hesitation. It was almost like the strangest form of suicide as the roots tore the creature apart in bursts of blood, roots, and organs. Then, the roots seemed to pull the pieces deeper into its mass for some unknown reason. When I managed to finally find my voice, it was after I had to swallow down the urge to vomit up my breakfast. What was that? Hugin and Odin remained silent for a few moments, as if contemplating that same question. Then, Hugin broke the silence. Thoughtful one believes the bastardization is creating methods to germinate and proliferate. Mayhap the twisted wretch of root and flesh was a failed creation, aborted to save and recoup resources. If that pitiable thing was a failed creation, what might the final product look like, I wonder? What a sobering thought to come to. And that caused me to glance at the 3 cocoons filled with my former squad mates who had still been alive when I last saw them. What horrific mutations must they be going through at this moment? Can we leave? I asked with a hollow voice. I think that might be for the best. Nothing more can be done right now. We came here to scout out our enemy, and we have learned more than enough about our foe, for now. Without another word, Hugin veered away from the tree and back towards the wall, flying much lower than he had before. Eventually, we flew low enough for the hills to obscure the wall from my sight until we finally landed. This was when Hugin lowered his head to more easily allow me to slide off his neck and onto the ground. What are we stopping here for? I asked as Odin's form appeared by Hugin. A warbled hum came from Hugin. One-eyed girl, foreign she's not. Thoughtful one, a monster they see. Hugin is not wrong. To those who don't know him, Hugin can appear frightful. If that's the case, then where will Hugin go? I questioned since he and Odin had said that they'd be traveling with me. Thoughtful one will go with one-eyed girl. Just in a form that is not as preferred. Blue lightning covered Hugin as he shrank in size until he appeared like a mostly normal raven, ignoring the glowing electric blue eye of his. Then the miniaturized Hugin flapped his wings and flew over until he landed on my right shoulder. Thoughtful one carried one-eyed girl part of the way. One-eyed girl shall return the favor, yes? A thrumming laughter came from the shrunken raven, and I found myself smirking at the joke. Appears that way. I remarked before I turned to Odin. Do you have any recommendation on what I should do once I arrive at the wall, Lord Odin? I'm not certain on where to start with building up worship for you. Based on what I have currently seen of your people, it would be wise to take it slow on establishing worship. Mortals can be frightful and violent when told something that goes against what they believe. To your people, I am an unknown god from an unknown land. What would be best, for now, is to give your people an enemy that they can understand and focus upon. Odin put his ethereal hand on my left shoulder in reassurance, filling me with warmth and strength. I don't fully believe that they will be enough as they are now to fully eradicate this abomination, but it can buy time and delay this tree from spreading faster if left alone. While they do this, you can use that time to focus on building up my faith. We just needed to buy time. I only had to be convincing enough to my superiors so that they could take this threat seriously. Compared to inspiring worship in others, this should be simple. I couldn't fail, since both my people and Odin were counting on me. It will be done, my lord, I said with all the confidence I could muster. I know it will, Naya. I have faith in you. With those words, Odin faded away and left Hugin and I alone by this hill. Taking a deep breath, I turned to the direction of the wall and marched with resolve of what I had to do. I needed to save my people. There was a tension in my stomach upon approaching the gate of the wall. On top of it, I saw the archers, ballistas, and trebuchets that could all spell certain death if let loose upon me. I doubted that they were prepared for my approach since the scouting party I was with never came back when they should have. My eye spotted a good deal of activity which consisted of soldiers moving around, likely reporting my appearance to command. I was probably going to have a long day of being debriefed. After all, I was coming back when a paladin wasn't. A captain, no less. Thankfully, I was able to reach the gate unhindered as the reinforced gate of wood and steel was raised at my approach. Waiting on the other side of the gate was a stern-faced man with short-cropped blonde hair and a scar going across his face in dull plate and a blue tabard. I knew him to be Lieutenant Johann. Private Baraha, you've returned alone and injured. Lieutenant Johann commented. I spotted a few looks from the surrounding soldier as I heard this. Quite a few of those looks were focused on Hugin, who quietly sat on my shoulder and observed everything with an intelligent interest. Stopping before the lieutenant, I gave a salute. Yes, sir. There was a terrible incident during the mission and I was the only one to survive, though not unscathed. I replied. Lieutenant Johann's eyes slightly narrowed at my reply as he gazed at Hugin on my shoulder. And the bird, Private Baraha? This is not a place for pets. Hugin's feathers slightly ruffled at being referred to as a pet. He's not a pet, sir. He saved my life and has been with me ever since. I'm not leaving him. Sir. I argued back, earning a look from the officer that I couldn't understand. Then it appears that there's a lot that you'll need to explain in your debriefing. Come with me, since the commander will be quite interested in knowing why one of his captains didn't return. Lieutenant Johann commanded. Then, he turned around and began to march as I quickly followed after him. Behind me, I heard the gate being shut, fully cutting me off from the Abelian hills beyond. Yet, where once the wall and gate would make me feel safe from the monsters beyond, now, it inspired a growing dread, as it simply allowed the monsters to hide from sight until they were ready to strike. As Lieutenant Johann and I made our way through the keep, I continued receiving looks that I was unaccustomed to. Before, my fellow soldiers would avoid looking at me so as to not meet my ugly gaze. Now, I could feel the gazes upon me. I could hear the whispers as they wondered what happened to my eye, why I had been missing, why Lieutenant Johann was escorting me, what was with the bird on my shoulder. I couldn't decide which was worse, being ignored by everyone or receiving their judgmental attention. Entering the keep, we marched down a few hallways and then up a flight of stairs. All the while, I was trying to come up with a way of explaining the events of my miraculous survival. If I lied about Hugin being a mostly normal raven that simply distracted the roots from killing me, then the threat may be underestimated and my report may come into question. The worst possibility is if my superiors believed that I had abandoned my squadmates to die, and everything I told them was just a way for me to avoid punishment. They may even wave off such a threat as me fabricating an enemy. But I also couldn't completely explain Hugin's divine nature, as they may label me insane or a heretic, even if Hugin could prove some of what I claimed. It's not like they could see and feel Odin like I could, and I needed Roble to focus on the red tree instead of arguing about religion right now. What could work is to mix in truth with the lie. Omit the parts of Odin and explain that Hugin is a magical raven that saved me. I wish I could tell Hugin the new plan, but Lieutenant Johann would definitely overhear me whispering. Hopefully, Hugin was smart enough to play along and not go overboard. A few minutes later and we stood before a door emblazoned with a shielded crest containing 4 stars. The symbol of Commander Darian Arnold Lachlan's family. They were known for their distinguished history as devoted paladins to the 4 great gods. Standing on either side of the door were a pair of heavily armored guards that seemed like statues of armor instead of men due to how little I could see of their bodies not covered in plate. Lieutenant. The armored figure on the right acknowledged, his voice echoing from his helm. Is Commander Darian available? Private Nair has a report about Captain Frankus that the commander would wish to hear. Lieutenant Johann asked. The armored figure nodded and opened the door to the office. Lieutenant Johann and Private Nair are here to speak with you. The armored man announced. Let them in. The voice of Commander Darian replied. With this, the guard stood aside from the door and Lieutenant Johann and I entered inside the commander's office, a place I had never personally been since being stationed here. Pretty much none below the rank of lieutenant would ever step foot inside unless they were being promoted, punished, or had information that the commander needed to hear immediately. Even then, while I may be part of the 3rd group, that didn't mean I couldn't also be punished if the commander didn't like my report. Looking around, I saw that Commander Darian's office was decorated with multiple different iconographies of the 4 great gods, be it through paintings or small figurines. In addition to this, there were also multiple weapons decorating the walls, with the most cherished being the Orichalcum Morning Star hanging on a few hooks behind where he sat. From what I knew, it was a cherished family heirloom passed down to each Lachlan since the founding of the Roble Holy Kingdom. It was called Dawnfall, and the 2 times I've ever seen the commander actually brandish it, something ended up dead. First time was during a demi-human assault on the wall. The second time was when he executed a deserter by crushing the man's skull into pieces with a single swing of the weapon. Commander Darian was someone as fair as he was brutal, and it's probably what's been his best trait while commanding this keep. As for the commander himself, He looked like a golem made from stone and covered in flesh. He was almost 7 feet in height, with rumor being that there was a giant in his family, not that any would say it to his face. And said face looked squarish, with grey stubble covering his jaw and tufts of matching colored hair at the sides of his head, with most of the rest being bald. Then, there were his ice blue eyes that made one feel as if the harshest winter was gazing down on you. It was no wonder that most found themselves intimidated whenever they had to speak with him. And, stepping into the middle of the room with Lieutenant Johann only brought those harsh eyes on me before they looked over to the lieutenant. "Lieutenant Johann. What is it that you wish to tell me?" His voice rumbled. "One of the scouts of the team sent out 2 days ago, led by Captain Frankus, returned less than 20 minutes ago. I felt it prudent for you to know what happened to your captain directly from Private Nair instead of needing to wait for the report." Lieutenant Johann answered. Commander Darian gave a gruff nod. "Much appreciated, Lieutenant." His eyes then flicked to mine and bore down upon me. "Private Nair Baraha, give me your report." "Yes, sir," I replied as I stood at attention. 2 days ago, Captain Frankus led a squad consisting of Jasper, Anthony, and I on a scouting patrol southeast from here. Originally, we found nothing of import, nor were there any demi-humans. But we all had this feeling of unease that wouldn't leave us be, like something dangerous was getting closer to us. Captain Frankus planned to have us conclude our mission on top of a hill before heading back. I couldn't stop my mind from flashing back to that moment as we went up the hill. The further up we went, the more we noticed these strange crimson roots growing from the ground which none of us could recognize. We discovered the origin of those roots as we crested the hill and discovered a crimson tree devoid of leaves and surrounded by multiple bundles of roots. "A crimson tree?" Lieutenant Johann questioned aloud, to which I nodded in answer. "Yes. But it was as we got a little closer that we noticed the absolute wrongness with the tree, and probably the unease we had been feeling the entire time we traveled. We finally spotted the bodies that the tree was growing both into and out of, from small animals, birds, hawks. And all of them were still alive. That caused a slight flicker in the stony expression of Commander Darian before it returned to normal. Those bundles of roots we saw earlier? They held still living bodies in them, from the limbs we saw that stuck out of them which were still moving. It was when we tried to leave that this thing struck. Crimson roots burst from the ground and attacked us. Jasper and Captain Frankus were able to immediately react and block the attacks. I almost failed to react fast enough in time, but Anthony didn't, and he got hit and impaled by one of the roots. In my mind, I could still hear him scream in fear as he was pulled away. He was still alive when it impaled him, and more roots immediately grew off the first root and continued to stab him in different areas. Then, it pulled him away to a mound of roots before cocooning him, all the while screaming. My hesitation at watching this cost me as a root took my eye, but I did react fast enough to pull away before it could grow like it had on Anthony and grab anything further. I almost thought that Commander Darian had given me a look of sympathy before I continued. The 3 of us were forced to retreat, with Captain Frankus covering our retreat as Jasper and I cut roots down ahead of us. But there were too many of them, and we had unknowingly walked right into a trap. Captain Frankus fought his best, but the roots got him in the end and cocooned him, just like they soon did to Jasper. I should have been done for, surrounded as I was, especially since Jasper and Captain Frankus were better fighters than me, but my friend here saved me. I pointed to Hugin, who preened his wing for a moment and then fixed an electric blue eye on the officers. Commander Darian had a narrowed gaze at the raven, but Lieutenant Johann voiced his thoughts on it. "How did a bird save you from this demonic tree, Private Baraha?" Lieutenant Johann interrogated. Hugin and I shared a look with one another, then I turned back to the officers. "He's not a normal raven. He's capable of magic." This finally got Commander Darian to speak. "What?" I motioned my head to Hugin. "Go on, show them some lightning," I said, ushering Hugin. Said raven gave a warbled click and extended his right wing forwards. The officers gave the display a questioning look, then a buzz of lightning filled my ear as a ball of blue lightning appeared in front of Hugin and I, much to the dismay of the officers. When the lightning finally died down, both men had widened eyes, and I took that as the chance to continue. He called down lightning for me to clear a path, and I escaped the hill. I spent half a day recovering enough from my injury to scout out the hill from afar, and I saw that the crimson roots had grown even further than before. Then I found out the use of the cocoons. Things caught in it are changed into a horrid hybrid of that tree and the victim's body. The one time I saw it, I think it was a failed creation because it was soon torn to pieces. I decided to lie about the length of time it took for me to recover to hide the fact that I flew most of the distance back to the keep. Then that means that the men who had been captured, Lieutenant Johann said in an angered horror, are likely being changed as we speak. Commander Darian finished for Johann. We need to look into this matter further. He then looked back to me. I'd like to confirm some things if this is the end of your report. Essentially, sir. After examining the tree and the hybrid it produced, I ran back here immediately. I concluded as Hugin went back to preening his feathers while taking furtive glances at the two men. The commander nodded and spoke. Let's begin with the bird on your shoulder. What is it? My gaze turned to Hugin, who pretended to not notice the attention he received. I don't know, sir, but it doesn't really matter to me. He saved my life and has stuck by with me since then, so I consider him a friend. As if to exacerbate the point, Hugin spread his wings out and cawed loudly before moving up my shoulder until he was touching my head. Mayhap the gods sought to save you with this creature. It's not for me to judge. Ironically, he was correct that it was by divine providence that I had been saved. It's just that said origin wasn't one of the four as he was thinking. What will be done with it? If he wants to stay with me, then I shall let him. I'm not very inclined to separate from him, sir. I answered. Commander Darian gave a hard look to my eye for a moment before finally appearing to relent. Take it to Andros to be examined if it is to stay here. Additionally, if it takes any malicious action to the soldiers here, it will be on your head, Private Nair. Do you understand? The commander asked in warning. I gave him a nod. Yes, sir. As for the next matter, what would you say was the growth rate of this entity? Following this, what would you estimate the distance of it to the wall? The hill it was on went up a good 40 yards. Its roots visibly went down half of it, with the tree being 10 yards high when I first saw it. Today, when I scouted the creature again, its roots covered the entire hill and was spreading onto the other nearby hills. As for distance, within 50 miles, possibly 20 at the smallest estimate. I answered. A concerned look appeared in Commander Darian's eyes as he rubbed his chin in thought. 2 days, and it has managed to spread that far. A few weeks, and if it maintains a steady growth rate, it will be at our wall. He shared a look with Lieutenant Johann, who shared the same look of concern as the commander. We should send out a scouting team to confirm Private Nair's report and if anything has changed. Lieutenant Johann recommended, to which the commander nodded in agreement. I'm in agreement. From there, we'll need to assemble a strike force based on what is discovered. The commander said as he took out a quill and already began drafting an order. Private Nair, would you be able to point out the approximate location of this hill on a map? I nodded, which got the commander to set aside the mostly completed order he had written as he reached from the drawer of his desk and pulled out a rolled sheet of parchment that was opened up to reveal a map of the area by the keep that was within 50 miles. Can you show us? Walking up to Commander Darian's desk, I analyzed the map and drew my finger across it until I landed at the area I thought to be where the tree was. Around here, sir. Good lass. We'll look further into this, but you have done admirable work bringing this information to us. Hearing the commander compliment me was surprising, and I found it impossible to hide the surprise on my face from hearing it. Lieutenant Johann, take Private Nair to the infirmary and have them take a look at her, especially that missing eye of hers. Then, deliver my orders. Private Nair, after the healers are done with you, head to Andros. As Commander Darian finished giving these orders, he folded up the order and sealed it in wax before stamping it with his mark. Lieutenant Johann and I gave a salute before the lieutenant was given the sealed order. As this happened, my mind pondered exactly how a trip to the healers would work out. I knew that magic could heal missing body parts if it was powerful enough. The only problem is that if they tried to restore my eye, then nothing would happen. It made me wonder how I was to explain that, especially since they might make the assumption that injuries given by the Crimson Tree would be difficult to heal. That could lead to issues if the healers assumed that any who suffered similar injuries needed to be written off as impossible to heal, and therefore left to die since they believed it to be a waste of time and effort. Since I had no explanation that I could invent at the moment, I would just remain silent for now. Knowledge about my connection to Odin had to be kept hidden until the proper time. As we turned to leave, that was when Odin took the chance to appear next to me, not that anyone else in the room showed any sign of noticing his appearance. I did my best to keep myself composed as Lieutenant Johann and I, with Hugin on my shoulder, walked out of the room and the god followed beside me. It is a good idea to stay silent. Instead, we shall establish my presence through minor miracles. Sometimes, belief does not need grand gestures to generate, but minor acts that might touch only a single soul. I gave Odin the most subtle nod I could, which got the elderly god to smile. But I think that such an act will be sooner than expected. When we arrive at the infirmary, we should take a moment to look around. That request from Odin wasn't one that I expected, but I didn't make any disagreement about it while Hugin made a thrumming rumble, earning a passive glance from Lieutenant Johann. It seemed that Hugin enjoyed this attention as he turned his head almost 90 degrees so that his blue right eye could look at the inquisitive officer until he broke gaze with the raven. After this, there wasn't much else said on our journey to the infirmary within the keep. It was certainly interesting to watch Odin examine every person or place that we passed. His glowing blue eye seemed a constant blur as it hungrily took in everything it saw. But with what I knew of the god's history, he had been willing to sacrifice an eye and hang himself from the branch of a primordial tree for days on end just to learn more about creation. With this being a new realm for him, he likely wanted to know everything he could about this place. It didn't take much longer for us to arrive to the infirmary where a priest in blue robes arrived to greet us. Every soldier knew the names of the healing priests since we've all been here at least once during our service. This priest, a man with swept-back salt and pepper hair, was named Karen. "Greetings," Karen said as his gaze fell upon me, and more specifically, the feather eye patch covering my missing eye. "I can tell that your injury was quite recent." He looked up to Lieutenant Johann and asked, "Is that why she has been brought here?" The officer nodded. "Private Naya just came back from the field. See what you can do to help her, and make sure to remind her to meet with Andros after she is done here." Lieutenant Johann then looked to me. "I leave you in their care while I go to deliver the commander's order. Once finished here, and with Andros, you can take the remainder of the day to rest." With that, Lieutenant Johann quickly left me to the care of Karen. "Come, Naya. I doubt that you wish to stand the entire time it takes to fix you up." I found myself slightly smiling at the priest's offer. Technically, Karen could heal others with one of his spells within a minute or so. This was just his way of allowing soldiers a bit longer of reprieve before they had to report back to their stations. "Thanks, Karen," I said as the priest led me a little further in the infirmary, where we ended up passing by multiple soldiers wounded on beds. I could see the two other priests, Howland and Anderson, busy moving from soldier to soldier, attempting to heal them, but it seemed that their efforts weren't as effective as they should be. Eventually, I was led to sit on the edge of a bed as Karen slightly kneeled down to look at me. "Interesting bird you have there," the priest commented, earning a rumbling gurgle from Hugin as the raven focused his blue eye on Karen. "Yeah, more interesting than you'd believe," I confirmed, getting a chuckle from Karen before he settled down once more. "Do you mind if I remove the covering?" Karen asked. I nodded and watched as unbound the feather and set it to the side. "Since I lost it, I've kept the eyelid closed. Could you open your eyelid for me?" I obeyed his request and felt so strange to feel my eyelid open, yet still see nothing. It just served to remind me of what I've permanently lost. But much to my surprise, Karen reached into my empty eye socket and pulled out ground-up plants and moss. How did I not notice that was in there? Looks like you did good work on cleaning up your injury and stemming the bleeding. Also appears like it was a clean removal, relatively speaking. Karen remarked before he squinted at something he suddenly found fascinating. What is that? What is what, sir? I questioned back in concern. He seemed to squint again before he shook his head. Nothing, Naya. Just seeing things, is all. Probably because I've been up for 20 hours. Karen replied with an embarrassed smile. Now, let's see if we can get you your sight back. He then held his hand in front of my eye as a magic circle grew to life before my eye. Heal. I felt his magic suddenly suffuse my eye socket, and there was this strange moment where I could just feel that my eye wanted to regrow, but then it stopped. The magic instead just fixed any of the damage in my eye socket that hadn't healed. The look of surprise and concern on Karen's face also aided in this. What caused this injury? This should have restored your eye, but nothing happened. Karen asked in slight disbelief. I closed my eyelid on my empty eye socket and began tying the feather back over it. A monstrous tree root ripped my eye out, I answered. A look of contemplation appeared upon his face while his brow furrowed. It possibly left a curse or some kind of poison that is preventing the regrowth of your eye. Karen theorized incorrectly before he stood up again. I'd be more than willing to work on your eye issue at a future time, but today is not the best day since we've got an entire squad of injured who are taking up all our resources to keep alive. That explained the many injured in the infirmary today. I'll be fine, Karen. Thanks for taking the time to try and heal me, I said in reassurance. Karen gave a light smile at this. Take a few minutes to rest here for a bit before you head off to Andros. It was soon after this that Karen left to tend to the other injured here. With this moment of reprieve, I found myself looking around the area of the infirmary until my eye fell on Odin looking intensely at one of the injured soldiers resting on a bed. What surprised me was when Odin looked over to me and spoke. Naya, go towards the boy. Why is that, Lord Odin? I whispered silently as I walked to the boy who was covered in bandages soaked in blood. From what I could tell, his injuries were probably too severe for the power of the healers to fix. The stench of blood and some type of rot wafted from the bandages covering him. His wounds were definitely infected, despite everything that had been done for him. It was more of an impressive feat of willpower that the boy was still trying to cling on to life with how little strength he had left. Yet, even with that strength, I doubted that he'd last another day. What was interesting Odin about the boy? I watched as Odin's ethereal form walked to the side of the boy's prone body and I walked over to stand next to him. The smile that was usually on Odin's mouth fell into an expression of solemn respect. In all of Yggdrasil, and of all the gods and goddesses that hold dominion over the realms, there are only a scant few that preside over death. Hell shepherds those who passed naturally, but still oversees all those whose last breath of life echoes from their bodies. My beloved Freya takes first choice over those who fell in battle and leads them to the fields of Folkvanger, and finally, I get second choice to take those who I deem worthy to Valhalla as my Einherjar. Most often, it is my Valkyries who will escort these chosen to my halls, but on rare occasions, I will perform the deed myself. Yggdrasil hasn't fully strengthened the connection she has built, so it will be a short time before the other deities discover this new realm. Souls might only start trickling from this realm to hell, but my beloved Freya and I have to pick out those who have fallen ourselves. I think that the others might forgive an old man for deciding to delay a warrior's end for just a while longer. I looked over to Odin who continued looking at the boy, but he isn't dying in a battle. He's dying in a bed in the infirmary. I pointed out to the elderly god. Odin looked over to me with his blue eye and gave me a soft smile. And what is this if not a battle? It may not be on a field of blood and steel, but make no mistake that this is a battle. He spends every last bit of strength fighting against a venom in his body which saps at his strength. Each moment, he single-handedly holds death at bay so that he can fight one moment longer. This is a battle, and regardless of if he wins or loses, the boy plans to make death earn its claim on his soul. This is a warrior, and his battlefield may not be a traditional one of ballads, but it should receive the respect it deserves. This battle is also one that he's obviously fated to lose. But sometimes. Odin glanced over to me and gave a smile and wink. Gods can be impressed enough by a mortal's actions that they decide to intervene. May this old god receive your help, Naya Odin speaker, in rewarding this warrior? Looking back to the boy, whose face was scrunched in an expression of agony as he continued to hold on to life, I nodded. What do you need me to do, Lord Odin? Just to trust me and remember what is done. I trust you, I said with complete faith, getting a warm chuckle as Odin's form then moved towards my body before merging with it. Once he did so, it felt like my body was thrumming with power, yet I also felt almost like a stranger in my own flesh. My movements were not my own as I watched my hand move by itself, clenching into a testing fist before uncurling. Then, my body leaned over that of the boy's, with my right hand placed over his heart and my left hovering over his forehead. I felt a power move through my body and converge on the tip of my left index finger, while more power covered my right hand. With great care, my finger traced runes into the boy's forehead, and as they traced onto the boy's flesh, it felt like the knowledge was being traced into my mind. Valhalla Tharf Eki in Thahik. A voice came from my mouth, but it was not fully my own, yet also not fully Odin's. As my finger finished tracing these runes, they glowed brightly and wind seemed to blow away from the runes, pulling at my hair and clothes. Yet, my eye remained fixed on the boy's form as it seemed to convulse under my touch. Light seemed to glow from his eyelids and mouth as he made a silent scream. "What are you doing?" A voice cried out from behind me, but I couldn't pull myself away from the task at hand as I watched the sickly skin of the boy turn a rosier hue as power continued to fill him. His almost black hair gained a few white strands while what visible wounds I had been able to see were all closing. I heard Hugin caw and screech as he flew off my shoulder and to whatever was behind me, but my focus was still trained onto the boy until the runes on his forehead finally faded along with the glow of his now opened eyes and mouth, leaving a pair of green eyes full of shock that were fixed on my one. Soon, I felt the power of Odin leave me as the elderly god appeared at my side and I regained control of my body once again. This allowed me to pull away from the boy for a moment before his hand reached out and desperately grabbed my wrist. The gods. I saw one of the gods. Are you one of their messengers? For a moment, I was hesitant at how to answer and glanced over to Odin, who gave me a reassuring smile and nod. Then, I turned back to the boy and nodded as, softly, words seemed to just come from me that I was uncertain on if they were mine or some remnant of the traces of Odin's power still within me. Lord Odin wanted you to live. He saw you as a warrior worthy of a second chance, so he gave it back to you. A name. Why you were granted one of their names? He asked in astonishment, to which I nodded. He believed that one of the four told me their names, yet I decided to not disagree with it. Yes. But for now, you should rest after your long battle against death, I said in reassurance which seemed to cause the boy's eyes to start fluttering in exhaustion. Before he could fully pass out, he managed to ask, through sheer force of will against the heavy urge to sleep, what is why your name, messenger? Naya Odin speaker. I replied quietly. He nodded as his eyes began to close and his hand fell back to his side. Then, he peacefully slept. It was after this that a flutter of wings filled my ears and Hugin's weight now rested on my shoulder once again. As I turned around, I saw the three priests in the infirmary looking at me with wide eyes as they looked between me and the healed boy that had been written off for death. How did you do this? Ulrich's injuries were beyond the capabilities of the healing power granted by the four. How did you, a normal soldier, manage such a thing? Karen questioned in astonishment. Looking at my hands, I wasn't certain on how to fully answer that. I'm not sure. Something just compelled me to do so, I said in a half-truth. Is something wrong? Slowly, Karen slowly composed himself as he walked over to me and gently touched my shoulders. Shaking his head, he smiled, no. What we just saw was an actual miracle of the four. One that deigned to work through a humble soldier of the kingdom to save another, and we would be fools to treat such a miracle with ostracism. As he said this, the two other priests moved past us to look over Ulrich. Please, Miss Baraha, could you tell me if it were possible for you to perform such a miracle again? Looking down at my hands, I could feel the power still within, waiting to be unleashed through the knowledge that was almost engraved into my mind. A quick confirming glance over to Odin's smile, and I looked back to the priest. I believe so. Karen's smile grew brighter at hearing this. Would you be willing to look over a few of our other patients? They were part of the squad with young Ulrich who had been assaulted by the group of Nagas. So, this is what Odin meant. Start through minor miracles that would only touch one soul. I don't think that I could heal everyone, but those that I did would remember Odin's kindness. They might only think that Odin was one of the four great gods or the minor gods under them at first. But that only meant that people would be more willing to accept Odin. After all, none of the four had names, only titles. They might just infer that he was one of them until Odin grew a large enough following to shed that connection. Take me to them. I spent the next 20 minutes saving 4 other members of the squad that had been poisoned by the Nagas. Sadly, the rest of the squad didn't survive long enough to receive my aid. But I still saved 4 more. 4 more who now knew Odin's name and kindness. Sergeant Kellen. Standing before the commander, I had a foreboding feeling in my gut. His order that I had been given was straight and to the point. I needed to assemble a small scouting part of 5 that should be fully geared up and ready to leave. Then, we had to meet with him in his office for the details to this mission. As such, I got my best people. Sarah, Yorick, Kithion, and Jace were my immediate choices. All of them were quiet, fast, and knew their way through a fight if necessary. Commander Darian, I've assembled my 4 best scouts, along with myself. What are the details of this mission you have for us? I asked with a simple salute. The commander motioned us to his desk, and the 5 of us approached a map of the keep and its surrounding lands. On it was a circular marking that was approximately 25 miles from where we stood. It was there that the commander pointed to. Sergeant Kellen, earlier today Private Naya returned from the scouting mission that her group had been sent on 2 days ago led by Captain Frankus. She came back as the only survivor. My eyes narrowed in concern at this news. Captain Frankus was a strong warrior in his own right, especially as a paladin. The fact that only a lowly private returned bode extremely ill news indeed. What happened? I asked. Based on the report, a monster in the form of a crimson tree attacked the scouting squad and took the 3 other members of the squad to be transformed into monsters. My look of horror must have been obvious enough for the commander to see as he continued. It's extremely disturbing thing to hear, but from what I extrapolated from the report, this creature captures its victims by impaling them upon roots, keeping them alive the entire time, before dragging them off to be cocooned and transformed. What is more disturbing than this is that this creature has been rapidly growing and expanding its area of influence. How rapid, sir? Sarah questioned. It covered half of the hill it was on in its crimson roots when Captain Frankus' squad first encountered it. A day and a half after Private Naya recovered from an injury she had sustained out in the field, she checked it once more to see that it had grown past the hill and was beginning to cover the other hills around it. Then, she spent the rest of the time running back here to tell us. Commander Darian answered as he laced his fingers together and rested his chin upon them. Examining the map once again, I could only guess how long this thing might take to reach the wall. Weeks at the earliest, but the radius it would control would be massive. My squad isn't exactly equipped to take on something like this, sir. I remarked while pondering what had to be done to stop this thing. I don't expect any of your squad to fight it, Sergeant Kellen. This creature seems to try and rapidly grow into anything it stabs. That makes melee combat against it a measure of last resort, at best. This creature is to be fought, it needs to be done from a range. As the commander said this, he stared directly into my eyes. Your squad is to only observe and report on any changes you see from the creature, such as the range of territory it covers and any potential hazards that Private Naya hadn't seen during her observations. The commander then set 3 scrolls onto his desk which I was familiar enough with. They were spell scrolls, but I was amiss on what spell that each had stored in them. These scrolls are each enchanted with the message spell. I want an initial report to be sent with the scroll as you and your squad remain there to give further information. I will be assembling a strike force with long-range spellcasters along with soldiers to haul oil. Oil, sir? Keithian questioned. I'm going to have the area surrounding this creature be covered in oil and lit up, Commander Darian stated without a hint of emotion in his tone. But, sir, that could start up a massive wildfire. Do we have any method to control the spread? Jace pointed out, to which the commander shook his head. No, and even if we did, we won't be stopping it. If this initial strike doesn't work, I want the area around it to be burned, and anything once living there to be chased away. I have no idea on if this monster requires other living creatures to survive or not, but I have no plan on finding out. The commander explained bluntly, without any attempt to soften the answer. In a way, it's what made the commander respected around the keep. He wouldn't try and lessen whatever actions he needed his soldiers to do with flowery words. He also wouldn't order anyone to do a task that he wouldn't be willing to do himself. Are we even certain that Baraha was telling the truth? Could be that she embellished her report to you. Why all of these extreme measures? Yorick wondered, earning a dry look that could be the closest one could consider to a glare that the commander was willing to make. I have little reason to doubt Private Baraha's report, but just as a precaution, it's another reason that I'm sending your group to scout out this creature. And as for my extreme actions, this is far from extreme, it's justified. We have enough to deal with when demi-humans perform their incursions on our lands without adding a newly forming enemy to it. I can already see the immense danger facing our kingdom in the future if we don't take care of this creature in its infancy of power. Never forget, we are the first line of defense against the monsters that wish to kill, enslave, or eat our people. I plan for us to also be the last line of defense so that they never need to suffer such horror. If something breaches the section of the wall under my authority, then I see it as my own failure to keep up to that standard. The commander's chastisement quickly silenced Yorick as his tanned skin turned a ghostly pale. You understood, sir. I apologize for Yorick's words, Commander. I began before Commander Darian held his hand up to silence me. You do not need to apologize. Yorick had concerns he wished to be heard. I gave him a thorough response. I gave a respectful nod to the commander. If it had been any other commander, Yorick would probably be getting a lashing or some other equivalent punishment for speaking out against a commander's orders. Of course, Commander. My team will be on the move within the hour, I stated simply. Then I wish you all haste. The commander held out the scrolls for me which I took and stored away into my satchel. Dismissed. We gave him a salute before leaving his office. Trudging through the brush of the Abelian hills, my eyes made quick note of the sun soon moving to dusk. We likely had 2 hours of daylight at most. I planned for us to only remain in the area of this monstrous tree before the sun began to set. In the dark, there were too many risks of being ambushed by any unexpected ability of this creature. But the one thing that both my squad and I noticed as we drew closer to the estimated area of this tree was an ominous feeling that settled in our minds. Some form of wrongness that shouldn't be. This feeling was something I leaned into as my gut told me that this was all due to the creature. Sarge, something really doesn't feel right. Yorick was the first to comment after we had spent the past hour in silence. I looked over to my subordinate and nodded. We're getting closer. I replied quietly. From here out, speak only if necessary. The enemy is too close for idle chatter. I received nods from my squad as we continued on in silence. From there, we continued our silent march for more than 20 more minutes until I saw a red hill in the distance that almost appeared to be covered in thousands of red snakes. Above it was a crimson tree that stretched up into sight above it. Dotting the red hill were bundles of roots that we could see moving. Looking around, I spotted an empty hill that I motioned the others to move to. It was another 10 minutes from them to reach the top of it and get a good vantage of this creature. What I saw was disturbing to say the least. Private Naya had been correct in her report, as we could see those writhing crimson roots having spread halfway up a few of the surrounding hills. By the 4. I heard Keithian whisper to himself. Sarah tapped me on the arm and pointed out to one of the root bundles that had begun to heavily shake and move. Then, the roots unwrapped themselves and we watched what had once been an orc stumble out and roar out. Orcs are already a race which were unpleasant to look at, but this mutated abomination made all other orcs look beautiful in comparison. Tendrils of crimson slithered about its form. One jutted from the poor bastard's collarbone and into the side of its jaw. Another few wormed across its left arm as the root seemed to crush the thing's fingers into its hand when it attempted to close its hand into a fist. I watched as a few roots snapped its right leg, eliciting a howl of pain before the very same root snapped the leg back into place. In comparison, its right arm looked relatively decent as the root seemed to stretch across its arm like veins under one's skin. It didn't look at all pretty, but the creature closed its hand into a fist without the fingers being crushed. What surprised us next was to see a few tendrils on its body stab into it as the creature's head twisted and snapped to look at a bundle of roots that it painfully stumbled towards and jumped in, quickly being crushed by the roots of that bundle in a spray of blood and gore. This was one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen in my career as a soldier. Especially due to what I could see from the eyes of that creature. There was extreme fear in them, one which told me that the original mind of the creature had still been in there, stuck as a passenger in its own body that broke itself apart before committing suicide. After witnessing all of this, the only thing that came to mind was that the commander needed to bring more oil when he arrived to torch this thing. We had seen enough. I motioned to my squad to pull back, and we quickly made our way down the hill and continued moving a bit farther until I felt that we were a comfortable distance away. That was just demonic, Keithian said with a hollow gaze. Seems that Naya wasn't wrong about this creature. In fact, this creature seems even worse. Yorick remarked while sitting on the log of a fallen tree. What in the hell even was that monster? For that, I couldn't give my subordinate an answer. I'm not certain, but I'm going to report this to the commander. For now, assemble camp. And no fires, we don't want to be spotted out here tonight by anything. Saying this, I went off to send my report with the message scroll. After the sun set and stars filled the sky, we made the decision to sleep early in preparation for the commander bringing the strike force that was likely to appear in the morning. Since we were in enemy territory, we would be taking watch shifts for any attacks in the night. Being the squad's leader, I took first watch and patrolled the edges of the camp. All the while, my mind went back to that tree, and what it could even be. I've encountered many different types of beasts, monsters, and demi-humans, but I've never seen something like that until today. Where could it have even come from, since something like that doesn't just appear randomly out of thin air? All of it left a bad taste in my mouth and a growing pit in my stomach. Nothing of what I've seen today has been the closest thing to natural as the 4 intended. With good fortune, that wouldn't be an issue tomorrow after the monster got torched with all the other poor souls it ensnared into its grip. That was when I heard a crunch of a leaf and immediately drew my blade and spun around to see a human-like figure approach me with hands raised in surrender. My eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" I demanded, on the verge of calling out to the others. The figure soon stepped closer as moonlight was able to shine just enough to reveal the smile of a familiar face, yet his eyes had an ominous red glow with slitted black pupils that seemed to constantly ripple and shift. A sense of shock filled me at seeing this face. Captain Francus? And as more moonlight shined upon him, I saw a body that seemed merged with crimson roots, covering the man like squirming veins. Then, he opened his mouth. "Good evening, soldier. Kellen, was it?" He greeted as if this was just a casual encounter between two comrades.